Welcome back to another installment of ferMentors. I'm Matt, your host. I also host Jaggers Brewing Co, so be sure to like, subscribe, follow, share, comment on both of those. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify for this channel and for the podcast Jaggers Brewing Co. So today's guest is a pretty special friend of mine, Mike Wiley, aka The Force. Do you have any other nomenclatures that you like to go by?
Pretty much anything.
Anything?
But the Force is always special to me, so.
Yeah?
Absolutely, yeah.
So he's kind of like the sorting hat on a special program that we have in our brew club. We do a thing called Nuts and Bolts. Nobody knows what styles that we're going to do or the teams, and this man here is responsible for that whole program. It's a pretty awesome deal, and I've had a lot of fun in it over the last couple years. So real quick, Mr. Wiley, why I got you here, and before we get started on these hardcore questions, I know that you're certified to do beer. Can you do meads and ciders as well?
Well, I'm not certified in either one. I've taken the classes. I've been judging wines for as long as I've been judging beer, which is over 30 years. Been making meads for almost 30 years. So I feel pretty comfortable judging those.
Okay, well that's good. So real quick, today's beer, we're here at Penny's Beer Garden. Thank you guys so much for hosting us. Today's beer for me is the equal parts Dad Pills. It's mighty delicious. What are you drinking?
It's a light snack for me, my friend. Something cool for a hot day.
Oh yes. So before we get really hardcore in today's conversation about how to judge and what it's all about, can you explain to us what the BJC program is and why is it so important?
Sure. It's part of the American Homebrew Association, though technically a little offshoot of it. The Beer Judge Certification Program was established in 1985 officially. The idea was we're making good beer, we're learning about homebrewing, so might also learn about the beers themselves. The judging program, the Beer Judge Certification Program, aids the person in education as far as this road we travel called homebrewing. Understanding why the beers have certain flavors, why you should use this yeast, why you should use these grains, and understanding that and evaluating not just your beers, but other beers you drink as well, whether commercial beers or beers from another homebrewer themselves. So that's where the program started. What it ends up doing, it's like a trade-off, where as you become better as a brewer, you'll find your skills as a judge also increase as well, because you understand what's going on at that point in time. So that's what it started with. The website, bjcp.org, is a wealth of knowledge for everything you want to know about homebrewing and judging beers themselves.
Be sure to check out the description. I'll have links to the BJCP, the style guidelines, these things that we'll talk about a little bit later, the scoresheets, and I'll also have a link to bottle ID forms and just everything kind of just to get you going if you're mildly interested in competitions and competing as an entry, right, or entrant. Additionally, if you are still mildly interested in after all that, there's a program called the Master Homebrew Program. It's a pretty awesome program, and a link to the program will be there. So, having gotten that out of the way, what's the best way to get started in judging? And from your perspective, does there seem to be any people that excel in the program more than others, for judging?
I want to say people excel. Some people naturally start well, I guess best way to put it. To get started in judging, if you've never judged before, many competitions have what they call stewards, who basically help bring beers, pour beers, and sort of monitor the table when beers are being judged. As a steward, you get to basically sample the same beers, don't have to write any comments, and then listen to the feedback and agree, disagree, or if nothing else, learn about the judging process itself. After that, in fact, what I normally do in most competitions when I judge, I look for people who haven't judged before to judge with. If for nothing else, to give them a reassurance like it is okay, get your feet wet, this is time to do it. And for new brewers, one of the best ways to expand your knowledge of brewing itself is going through judging.
So speaking of stewards, how important is the stewarding at a competition, and what does a steward actually do?
Okay, steward themselves physically at competitions. They'll bring a beer. Like when we judge beers, let me take a step back. You have a judging panel of 2 or 3 judges. One of them, at least one of them, is usually a certified or above judge in the BJCP program. Beers are tasted blind, so we have no idea who brewed the beer. We just know that here's the style or category and or subcategory of beer we're judging. We then judge those beers versus what the standard is, which is in the guidelines that we talked about earlier. The steward makes sure that, first and foremost, that proper beers are brought to the table. They make sure also that there's no real issue as far as a bottle. Like, for example, when you as a home brewer enter a beer, you'll have a label to monitor your beer, and the steward makes sure that label's not there because again, we're trying these beers blind. Okay? At that same time, they're the ones that make sure the beers in the glasses are proper filled. At least get a good look at the beers before you judge them. We'll talk about that when we go through the beer score sheet. When they open the beer, they'll get the cap back on the beer to preserve as much of the aroma that they can once that's poured, and also help answer questions. In other words, if I'm told, for example, that this beer is let's say a pre-prohibition lager, and something about it doesn't taste right, I may say, hey, Mr. Steward, I'm not sure this is actually what the beer is supposed to be. Can you check on this? And they become the liaison between the head judge and the judges to help answer questions like that as well. So what they do, the last thing they do, which I think is one of those subtle, important jobs that a steward does, is move the table. It's very easy at times when you're judging a beer to get caught up just yapping about the beer and yapping about the beer. After a while, it's kind of like we can move on. It is okay to move on. And one of the things a steward, one of the invaluable jobs they do, at least in my opinion, is help move that table along and getting beers judged. So they have that. It's a real subtle kind of role, but a very important role to get judging sessions done properly and done timely.
Keep everything on track.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be kind of fun. Let's just go ahead and get it out of the way. If you don't mind, will you tell the funny Matt story of judging with Matt? And to be fair, it was the first day I ever judged, and I'll backfill the story after you get done.
Okay. Here's the story as I'm going to tell it. We were judging. The judge site was a winery place, actually. And I was there starting the second session of judging. This day we were judging our 2 sessions. I had something to do, so I couldn't make the first session, but I was there for the second session. Matt had just finished his first session. I don't remember who with a very good judge. So he was amped up. He was like, man, this is really good. So he sat down. He's all excited. He's all ready to go, his pencil in hand, pour the first beer, and he's like starting right all over the place. I'm like, whoa, slow your roll, my friend. It's okay. We got time. So he's going through this, and he was fine. The good part was I was asking, like, again, with the first judge, I'll say, hey, if you have any questions, you want to talk about the beer as we go, that's fine too. Myself, personally, I tend to make my notes and then discuss the beer so I don't influence somebody. Some people just like to talk through the beer as you go through the judging session, which is fine too. There's not an incorrect way of doing it. It just ends up being a preference. Well, Matt first didn't want to talk, then he wanted 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 to talk. So after a couple of beers, me go like, okay, we're going to get through the session with one another. If we get this one beer, third or fourth beer we're pouring, Matt took a sip of it and he goes, oh, this is perfect beer. This is a 50-point beer. And I said, okay, let's back up a step. Because 50 point on the scale on the judging sheet for those who haven't judged, 50 is a perfect beer. In other words, you can't even make a commercial beer that's good, basically.
World class.
So I go, so Matt, what you're telling me is this is the best beer in the world and it can't be topped. He goes, well, and I said, well, see, once you say well, it's not a 50-point beer anymore. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I get it now. And so it's running back just a little bit in the sense of I'm doing things right. He was just so excited and exuberant to give these high scores that it's like, it's okay to give a high score. Just make sure you're doing what you're doing and enjoy it. And we actually had a great time. It was fun talking with him. Just one of the reasons I like judging with first-time judges is for that kind of reason. You watch sometimes they get underwhelmed. You got to boost them up. The other times, like,
ran them in.
And Matt said, whoa, baby, we're okay. So, but it was a good time. Once we got through the first couple, 3 beers, it was just smooth sailing after that. We just blew through in fact, we got through our flight pretty darn fast, actually.
We actually judged recently, about a year after that, and I feel like I've really have come into my own since then and been able to really figure it out, right?
Right.
And so judging your first competition, it's kind of like you get to see how the sausage is made a little bit, so you understand the mindset of what a judge is looking for and stuff like that. And I think that it will actually help you improve as a brewer, as a recipe developer, as a beer taster, as a commercial beer taster, either. So to kind of set up where I was coming from, though, then I had read a lot of things because I was super nervous. I had never judged a beer before. Like, it never even crossed my mind. Like, I entry into our homebrew competitions and stuff like that, and part of the team, right? So I've been sending these beers out, got some score sheets back, and I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to judge a beer and figure out how it's done. And so I read up on a lot of things. And so, and we had discussed this when we were talking, was that I had read that there's two different types of judges out there, right? Those that start off from zero and build a beer up, those that start off from 50 or the top and build it down. And, so I kind of still had that in my mindset at the second table. And one of the best words of wisdom that I got from you, especially just sitting at the table, was pour the beer. Look at it. Does it look terrible? Smell the beer. Does it smell terrible? Taste the beer. Does it taste terrible? If the answer of no is no to all of those, you're halfway there. And so, get numbers out of your head. Just experience it. And then go and backfill all those other little things and find those things that you like. Find the things you dislike, and then compare that to how it's supposed to be. So I'm a much better appreciate of beers nowadays because of you and that logic.
Just keeping it simple. My background is actually more of a wine guy than a beer guy. But I taught wine tasting classes, same thing I teach beer, just what Matt mentioned. I always tell people the same thing. Even when you're trying food, you take a bite of food, you like it, you don't like it. You take a sip of wine, you sniff of wine, you don't like the smell, you like it. Beer, same thing. You like it or you don't like it. That's a given. What you're doing at this point in time, then, is tell me what. Why do I like it? Tell me what you like about it. If you don't like it, tell me what you don't like about it. Because that's really the feedback, generally what the brewer wants. I don't need the overt minutia, because if you're off in the minutia pointing out, the brewer's going to think that you're just silly. Versus, okay, I get that.
That's a legitimate complaint, or this is a concern that is actual that I need to take into consideration.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes judges get a little too hypercritical, is probably the best way to put it. It's almost like for some judges, it's like they're trying too hard to show that they're a judge. And sometimes that's when they overstep their bounds to an extent where a brewer looks at them like, well, like for example, if the judge says, your decoction's off. Well, I didn't decoct my beer. Well, now in my eyes as a brewer, I can't trust you as a judge. And it's easier to say, you know what, I get these flavors, or I get this note. I really like this taste. I really like the color of your beer. I love the head retention of your beer. That tells the brewer little idiosyncrasies about his brew. I did something right in my building the recipe to have good head retention in my beer. I have certain flavors that came from that yeast I chose choosing yeast A or yeast B. So that's the kind of feedback I think that a brewer is looking for in the judging sheets.
Yeah, I heard a couple people suggest stay away from comments of like you should ferment between these temperatures, because what if you did? Or the decoction deal, I threw melanoidin malt in there, I didn't decoct, or whatever the case may be. Try to stay away from those. Just get more into I think you should focus on fermentation, or revisit the recipe just a little bit, or those kind of things.
Because in general, especially as you get more experience in brewing, the same kind of thing. You're going to have, let's say, you get an off flavor that could be yeast driven, could be recipe driven, could be fermentation driven, and maybe you get the same note that could be from three different bases for that flaw. So instead of trying to guess what it is, say, you know what, I'm kind of picking up a little too much of phenolics. which could be one of 3 or 4 things. Okay, well, the brewer knows, okay, well, I need to watch this or this or this. So instead of me trying to tell the brewer, okay, you need to watch your fermentation temperature when he actually is, now the comment I'm trying to be helpful on, I've actually just basically like shot myself in the foot, and at least in the eyes of that brewer.
Sure. So the next thing, BJC style categories and subcategories. Why do we have it set up this way? Why is it arranged like this?
Ideally, what the program tries to do, and you see the different categories, and it's expanding a little more. World Beer Cup and commercial competitions, there's even more categories and subcategories. So ideally, I try to group similar in terms of one, maybe a region, like here's some Belgian beers. Here's certain German type beers. You got Czech beers now, and you're now adding more and more very localized beers, like Brazilian beers and Argentinian beers, New Zealand, things like this. The point being, we're trying to make it as, I won't say as difficult as possible. It actually makes it a little easier. So like, well, I brewed a Brazilian X. And so, well, I can't judge it versus, let's say an IPA. Well, IPAs in, let's say, New Zealand are a little bit different from IPAs in England, which is obviously different from IPAs in America. So it's like, I need a little guidance. And that's kind of why they set these things up this way as far as the major categories. And the subcategories, you try to keep the beers within that range, whether it's a region, like say in England or Belgium or Germany, or maybe the style itself, like high gravity beers. Well, that's going to be some of a broad spectrum of some beers, but at least the idea, there's some commonality to them, right? Like when we look at, let's say, Russian Imperial Stout, barley wine, old ale, at least there's some common flavor components, but at least there's something you can compare them to for good, bad, and different. The subcategory helps define them a little bit better, so you as a judge, okay, well, this is why this is more of an old ale than a barley wine, and why this is more of the Russian Imperial Stout versus a Baltic Porter. But that's the idea for the bottom line is you have to go for the subcategories. They'll tell you the BJCP is just try to make things easier for you as far as just what you brew and as a judge, understanding the beers that you're judging.
Are there any subcategories that you feel like just are the actual like outshine part or the leading example of a particular category? Something like, say, like American light lager is the leading example of, or like the American beer style. What is it, like 1A, I guess, that includes wheat, ale, and all that.
And that's kind of the subtle flaw in the categories and subcategories, that even when you group them, try to keep them as close taste-wise as possible, you won't catch it. And there's going to be something that stands out for good, bad, or indifferent. Okay, so it's one of those, like saying the light lager category, well, American wheat's in that category, and it's like, generally speaking, a lot of people don't like to judge wheat beers. So it's almost like, well, this beer is going to be a kick because it's a wheat beer. And sometimes judges will overlook, well, it's a really well-made American wheat beer to the style. So sometimes while you try to be as objective as possible, because you're judging to what the style says it should taste like, is actually, it's common. Just nature of the beast, nature of us, that there's like, man, I kind of really dig this beer. Like, I'm a hophead, so like, I actually kind of avoid judging IPAs. It's really easy for me to be like, oh man, I really, really, really like this beer. And to the exclusion of others that maybe is made as well, if not better, but it's like, man, I really like the hops in this beer. Or like, say, it's one of those, and you'll find those that, even with the subcategories, you find one, all of a sudden your subjectivity takes a little bit over. It's like, man, it's close enough to style where I can pick this beer over that beer, even though the other beer is probably technically a better made beer, and that happens.
So now that we've got the whole understanding of categories, subcategories, why like the guidelines are kind of arranged the way that they are and everything, how do we judge a beer off of a score sheet like this? And how do we fill it out? And how much of it should be filled out from a judge whenever they turn it into that steward to get their next beers on the fly?
Okay, first use a pencil because things will change. Generally speaking, when you're judging, you have a broad range, like a 7-point spread. And so ideally, like when I judge with folks, I try to keep us within like a couple, 3 points, but it's like we're all kind of in the same mindset, what we like or don't like about the beer. It may be different things, but we know roughly where the beer is going to land. Now, as far as the sheet itself,
So you have 7 points between you and another person that's at the table judging, correct?
per the BJCP, yes.
Per the program.
Per the program.
Yes.
I personally like to have it closer, just because if you're a brewer and you get 2 score sheets, one gives your beer a 35, one gives your beer a 28. What did you really learn from that? Now, with that big of a spread, you're kind of scratching your head.
Right.
And again, it may not be like the judges are off. Just be sometimes, and that's part of the fun of judging, or the glamour of it, or you're going to call it, where it's like when you really discuss the beer, you get to a point like, no, this beer fits somewhere here. And we'll talk about it in the score sheet. Like one of the first things I'm going to tell Matt, as I tell every judge, when you're doing the judge sheet, again using pencil, fill out the necessary information up top. But what I tell them is look at the bottom left-hand corner, when it talks about, generally speaking, where's this beer kind of range, okay? So when you take that, you do your sniffs, and you can make your little mental notes, or start doing some writes on aroma notes and things like this. You take that first sip of beer. As we said, your first one's going to be, do I like it, do I not like it? Once you answer that question, how much do I like this beer? Man, this is really, really a good beer. So you're probably leaning more toward very good, excellent, maybe even outstanding, depending on the beer itself. Or it's like, man, something's just not right about this beer. Well, I know, generally speaking, that I'm probably looking at very best a very good beer, because it may have some flaws to work with, but more of the good type beer, which again, because I'm looking at the sheet, somewhere like could be up to a high 20, maybe 30, but somewhere in probably the mid 20s or so. It's kind of like, it's a good beer. It's like a Dick Clark thing. I can dance to it, but I'm probably not going to get a second, third, and fourth pint. So if you start from there, that makes the rest of the filling out part easier. In terms of, there are certain points for certain the subcategories that you're writing your judging notes on, and sometimes those get affected. Like for example, a beer that's flat, though it should only cost you 1 or 2 points technically, will affect obviously more things than just 1 or 2 points. But that being said, I want to make sure if I taste a beer that says, hey, this is about a mid 30 point beer. Again, when I say mid 30s, it could be anywhere from, say, 33 to 38, depending on our discussion. So the idea at that point in time is I'm going to fill out kind of what I think it should be. Then we'll talk about it. That's a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes that I usually use, that we talk about the beer we like, what we didn't like ourselves. And then sort of, do we come to the right kind of number? When it's a wide variance, it'll be one of those like, you know what? I can find a point or two, or I can lose a point or two. Let's make sure we're roughly where we need to be. When you work that big picture, it makes it so much easier to fill out all the details of the sheet. Now, as far as filling out, you want to fill out as much as possible. When I say filling out as much as possible, it doesn't mean write big to make it look like you did a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean scroll a lot of stuff to look like you did stuff. But tell them about the beer, okay? Like we talk about the aroma. What did you smell?
Smells good.
Like I normally, for example, I'll take the first sniffs and make some first little initial notes, because aroma is the first thing that'll fade on a beer. Just like wine, it'll fade. That's the first thing that fades. So you want to protect that and get aroma notes. I will come back to it a little bit later, because sometimes you may get a note, like you may get a little hint of phenolics when you first open the beer that just dissipates real fast. This means the phenols haven't really burned off yet. And actually, once the beer opens up, they're gone. Okay, but the idea being, now I get an idea. So as a brewer, I'm telling you, when I first sniffed your beer, I smell this. Is it warm? I'm smelling this. So it lets you know, okay, here's kind of aromas I'm getting through the time I'm tasting a beer, not just this one special moment. The appearance is important to the extent that there's usually not a ton of comments about it. Generally, like how clear is the beer? How's the color of the beer? You know, if there's beer that should have good head retention, tell me about the head retention of the beer. And if there's something about it that's just not quite right, like a beer that should be brilliantly clear that's hazy, just make that note. That way the brewer knows as well. Things for them to look at as well. The flavor part, it's actually one of the last things I thought, only because a lot of times the debate takes place more in the flavor. But again, the same kind of thing. Tell me what you taste when you sip the beer to when you finish the beer. And that's what I'm looking for as far as the brewer. What did me as a judge like or dislike about your beer? You know, I had this flavor said, it's hoppy, but it's too bitter, and it's bitter in a bad way. It's a bitterness that carries too far. It may be to astringent. It's like the astringency carries all the way through the beer. That's what the flavor is about. Tell me what's going on when you're sipping that beer itself. Okay? Mouthfeel part is like just a generality of the mouthfeel. Is a full body beer that it tastes like a full body beer. In wine terms, a beer that's a wine that's somewhat thin is like water. Okay? One that's kind of medium bodied is like 2% milk, and a full bodied wine or a heavier beer should taste like milk. Should have that weight of like milk on your tongue, which help describe the mouthfeel in that sense. Then you look at those little sensations, right? A beer that's undercarbonated. We talked about a flat beer. Undercarbonated beer will show some flaws obviously in the flavors, but you'll also feel that in the mouthfeel. So it'll linger bad on your tongue. Okay? And then the last overall impression is more just give me some of that generality. Tell me about what you liked about the beer, certain things I would suggest. In fact, maybe in the flavor as well. Man, I'm getting these kind of notes, which kind of lets me think this may have fermented a little too warm. I'm not telling you it did. I'm not telling you it didn't. I'm telling you that my experience is some of these flavors I'm getting may come from this, or maybe a yeast-driven flavor. Okay? Without trying to tell you, you must change this for your beer itself. And then at the bottom, the check marks, because every steward will ding you on this, and every head judge will ding you on this, is make sure every little check mark, they should be according. It's like, if you're telling me I have an outstanding beer, but I'm only getting like below average check marks, something's not quite right in my comments. And ideally, that's what your brewer's looking for. The brewer wants to know, generally, where's my beer, point-wise, obviously. That's the first thing I look at is the points. Then if it's like, I'm expecting, let's say, a low 40-point beer, and I'm getting a 30-point beer, I'm going to start scanning through here to see where I'm scanning through the sheet itself as I'm pointing that you can't see my finger, I guess. But I'm looking at, I guess I'll try to be better like this. I'm looking in the details here. What'd you tell me about the beer that made it a 30-point beer instead of a 41-point beer? Okay? And that's what they're looking for. That ideally, like I said, people enter, first and foremost, I don't care what they say, they want to win. And that's all good. And they want to learn about the beer. One of the things that Matt does in his brewing that I really like is the fact he'll just try stuff. It's not like, okay, well, this recipe book says I have to do A, B, and C. Matt says, well, what if we do this? What if we don't boil? What if we just do, this kind of fermentation instead? It's like, for good, bad, and indifferent. If it works, and it's something cool. If it doesn't work, lesson learned. No harm, no foul. He's not locked into, well, Charlie Papazian said it must be done this way, then that's what I'm going to do it. Because brewing is liquid. In fact, they tell you in that beer judge certification program, it's always changing. It's always changing. That's why more categories, more subcategories. You're seeing more of the localized or regionalized brewing styles themselves, because it's a fluid thing. Because it changed, and we have to, the judging program itself is set up to be adaptable that way.
To evolve as things change, as styles come in and out of those categories.
Exactly.
And stuff.
In fact, you'll see a lot of times, particularly in the newer categories, very classic categories, let's say like a Czech Pils. It's very distinct on it should be this and this and this, because we know what a Czech Pils should taste like, because, I don't know, 300-400 years of drinking Czech Pils, we kind of know.
Right.
Some of the newer styles and some of the newer areas that we're getting into, like when hazy IPAs first came in the area, and New England IPAs first came, as far as being inside of New England, you had to all of a sudden change how the beers were done. It's like, you know what, cloudiness is not a bad thing. Never technically a bad thing. But the whole point is, you're seeing the descriptors. The point I'm getting to is in the descriptors, you're seeing a lot of more, tend to be more middle of the road kind of descriptors. You have latitude as a judge to make that call. And that's kind of what's encouraged.
Or even some of those vague things when it comes to those descriptors, like moderate. Like, well, what's moderate to you may not necessarily be moderate to me, but is it really excessive or not excessive enough?
Right. And actually it's kind of a good thing. It allows you, as you're tasting the beer, to, again, be able to put down on paper what you're liking or not liking about the beer. Okay? In the technical descriptors, as far as bitterness levels and colors of the beer, you'll see a lot of them are just huge, wide ranges. So instead of like getting too hyper technical to make sure, well, this is more golden rod than light yellow or things like this, it's more of, you got room to figure this out. Because some people, and again, that ties in recipe formulation. People, I like using these grains instead of that grain. I like using melanoid instead of decoction because I can pull the same kind of flavors without having to bust my butt for 2 to 3 hours to make a beer.
Yeah.
So that's that good with it. It's understanding that's why they're done the way they are. Because you'll get some judges that will get so hyper technical to each little word. Yeah. It's like you're kind of missing the point. I mean, you're judging to a style, but just keep in mind that style is in essence kind of a living, breathing thing that will kind of change over time, particularly the newer styles as we add them on to the BJCP, to the guidelines.
What do you think about the historical side of things, where I guess they're not technically dead. I mean, some of them kind of are, but the historical guides, like, who really knows what a Kentucky Common actually tastes like? Who knows what the sot is and all that? Like versus what you just said about we've had 400 years of check hills. Like, we know what that tastes like.
Well, in the historical beers, that's where it gets a little tough. Excuse me. In the sense, and Kentucky Common's a great example. Well, we have recipes. We have breweries way back from in Kentucky, let's say. They were making this beer. Here's what we did, we made our beer. And trying to replicate it using more modern methodologies and techniques, we can, in essence, we're kind of replicating it, but since we didn't brew it exactly as was done then, it's a guess. But I have a problem with that. That's why actually in the same kind of sense, there's a little bit of wiggle room then.
I love that playground. I think that there's a lot of room for invention, right? Because like those things, like they're not around right now, and things have changed. Obviously, that technique or style hasn't stayed around long enough that it must be done like this, and so we have, like you said, that little bit of wiggle room, and I enjoy that wiggle room to play around with.
Well, and again, like I made the comment in the plug of you and your brewing,
right?
But to try different things, like, you know what? Okay, I have the guideline that tells the beer should taste like this. I can brew it one way. I can brew it another way. You know, I'm gonna try a third way and see if I can get the same kind of result.
Yeah, if I can achieve that with a different technique or whatever, what does it matter? Like, I still did it.
And bottom line is that's actually kind of the fun of this hobby. As far as being a brewer, it's like, you know, okay, I can sit there and like, it's like I'm a chef because I have a Julia Child cookbook. That doesn't make me a chef. It just means I can read a recipe. You know, it's ones that do like, okay, I've tasted her food. I like those flavors, but I'm going to do it this way instead of that.
Right.
Which is ideal. And that's the cool part. It's like, I don't have to do all this. I just do this. You know, I don't have to decoct. I can just add an Illinois grain. Or I can use more specialized yeast strains. Which, particularly the last 20 years, I guess, even more so the last 5 years or so.
Oh, yeah.
There's such a broad range of yeast that very specialized. It just, I want to say, in a way, kind of rewrites a lot of ways you do the recipe formulation, because I don't have to do some of these things, because I'm bringing out certain flavors just by using this yeast strain, or like, and control my fermentation temperatures a little bit different, which makes it fun.
Yeah.
For us as a judge, that's why we don't want to sit there and try to be critical, because I don't know how you brewed your beer.
Right.
I'm just tasting what you brewed.
Judging is a personal experience that you're trying to objectify and check against a set data points and compare it. What else is going on when you're trying to judge an entry? Anything?
First round type judging, it's really, you're just, what's the guideline say, what's this beer taste like? It's pretty much black and white. As you move into a mini Best of Show or a second round kind of judging situation, that first assumption is now gone. Your assumption as a judge is more about, okay, these, I don't have to look at the book per se, because they should actually kind of be there, right? You still try to be objective. That's what we talked about before, where you may have a bias to a subcategory. It's just, you got to keep that in your mind. It's like, I'm a wheat guy, but man, and to be honest, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, I'm a horrible light lager judge. I'm very sensitive to some of the flavor profiles, some of the grains, where it's like, a lot of light lagers, I get like a little hint of veggie, like green pea kind of note to it. And that's just my hypersensitivity. Knowing that, I know that I'm a bad judge for that. So it's almost like if I judge it and go, man, this really is off. It probably means, man, this is really spot on. I just don't know it because my palate says otherwise. Whereas like American wheat, man, I really dig this. And somebody say, I really don't like the spicy phenolic natures of wheat beers in general, so it's going to get beat up a little bit. But again, that's probably the nature of beast. That's probably the hardest part of judging, is keeping that in mind. Like, you know what? I've got to take that out of the final result, final choices I'm making, or final points I'm giving, the same kind of thing. The easiest thing, just the easiest thing. A lot of times we've been brewing in it's kind of like being an analogy like a judge at a dog show. I'm judging the sporting group, let's say, which is like, 12 to 14 different breeds. and I actually am the world's best breeder of, let's say, Cocker Spaniels. And I don't know if it's the same group. The idea being, if Cocker Spaniels are in that group of 12 to 14 dogs, more likely than not, I'm either hypercritical or I'm like, oh, it's even close, it's going to win because I'm a Cocker Spaniel guy. Same thing in beers. The hardest part, when you get, particularly at the first round, in that mini best of show or best of show, or like I said, second round type judging, where it's kind of like, I still got to stay objective and not like have that soft spot like, oh, I really like this beer. I really like this style, so that's why I brew this. This is a beer I brew all the time. And so I try to remove that favoritism or subjectivity when you're doing the judging itself.
Or kind of the other way around too. I know Case and I we judged. It was a mini best of show, and it was spice, herb, and vegetable. And he said, "Hey, just to let me, just so I know, do you have any allergies or anything to anything?" I was like, "No, but I am hypersensitive to ginger." And so we pulled the ginger beer, and he started laughing. And I said, "What?" And he said, "Oh, you're gonna love this." And so it's such a hyper sensitivity to ginger. Like if I can't pick it out of my food, I have to throw it away. It just ruins the whole experience to me. And so he said, hey, do you need to sit this one out? Do I need to grab someone else? I said, no, I will be able to be objective with it, And so I took one sip and I was like, that's it. The ginger is there. It definitely adds a flair for the herb, spice, vegetable part of it. And I tried to judge it as objectively as I could without letting my personal bias affect it.
And that happens. And just the best part is realizing it.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of times you get judges that just get locked in. And I've dealt with many of these types of judges all the years I've judged. I've judged for over 30 years. That they have a personal bias about a beer style they brew, so they'll tend to lean toward that beer if they're judging it in a mini best of show situation. Or if they had a beer that they've had bad experiences with, they'll tend to have just a negative connotation no matter what, even if it's the best beer ever made. They're going to mark it down because they just don't like the style or have bad experiences with the style. The hardest part is eliminating that because it's so easy, particularly in that second round or best of show. It's like, man, this, like for example, I love Baltic porters. And I've judged best of shows and Baltic porter, if it's made right, it's hard, to me, it's a hard beer to beat. But there's like, obviously in the best of show tables, a lot of great beers. But it's like, man, if I have to pick 3 or 4, that's probably one I'm leaning toward because that's just a style I really have an affinity for. But it's one of those where the hard part is that step back. And that's again more like we have that table. That's why it's just more than one judge. We can talk about this stuff. It's like, man, I think it's really good, but I think this beer is better. We had that this year at Rendezbrew at our best of show table. Same kind of thing. We had 3 outstanding beers at the very end. And we had our table basically we're all pulling for each of the beers. In that sense, like, man, I really like this one, I really like that one. But all of a sudden, as we talk about the beer and actually sometimes just letting the beer warm up a little bit, which tends to like let flaws come out. It became this one beer has lasted the whole time and still held its own the whole time, and that's why it won our best of show. And again, that's a very common thing sometimes when you're trying to eliminate that bias. It's like, just relax, talk about it. And for some of these beers, like I said, just let them warm a little bit, and you can let the flaws come out because they will. If there's flaw in the beer, it'll come out.
So I know we kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier, but so how does a entry travel from, say, sorting day? So it's been received, it's been checked in, and been stored and all that, and today is the judging day. How does a beer, say, go from that to a flight, and then travel all the way up the system to best of show or mini best of show table?
John, I'll use Lunar Rendezbrew, our competition, as an example. We get the beer sorted per category, so it all set up to go. They're stored in refrigerated storage, so that way they can age they can actually get stable or stay stable. Okay. A lot of times, particularly the last couple of years, entries coming in much earlier than actually the judging time itself. And maybe the beers are turned in up to a month before even judging starts. Okay, so during that month period, for example, it's in cold storage. In cool storage, keeping the beer safe, as best as possible that way. From there, we pull the beers, like say for a judging session. Let's say we're going to judge 4 categories. We'll pull the beers, first round beers for those 4 categories, and then transported in coolers with, and then again ice or cold ice blocks, whatever it may be. So the beer again maintains a cool temperature from the storage it's at to the place we're doing the judging at. So the beer at that time, like the big Yeti coolers, bunch of beers in there. At that point in time, the head judge is already sorted out in terms of for each of the categories. Like, okay, here are the beers for let's say for this one subcategory, there's like 12 beers. So we're going to have 2 tables judge 6 each. Okay, so 6 beers are pulled basically for this table, 6 beers are pulled for that table. Or if you work what's called a queue system, maybe you're judging 12 beers. They'll just come as they go, and all 12 beers in one spot. The head judge tells the steward, okay, for let's say Mike and Matt, bring them beer 1, and let's say because let's say Clay and let's say Randy Daly, just because I want to plug Randy Daly today. They'll get beer 2, and then as each of us finishes our beers, we'll just get the next one. We may get 3 and 4. We may be faster, and we may get 3, 4, and then get 2, 5, 6. The point is the beer at that point in time still stays cool to our table. Okay. If it's a little too cold, like for example a higher gravity or a heavier beer, you want it a little bit warmer than normal, kind of like a red wine. So I may let it sit at the table for just a little bit to let it warm up just slightly. Caps popped. If there's a steward there, the steward's popping the cap, he's pouring the sample to the glasses. If it's just us, it may be like Matt and I may put the bottle there in between he and I, one of us open the beers, we're pouring the beers into the cups. Okay, caps back on, just keep preserve the beer as best as possible. We go through our judging session, and then that beer goes back either back to the steward, or we may really like it and have there is an afternoon, so okay. And so then we make our markup. Say we have those 12 beers. There's 2 judging sheets that have this 6 each of the beers we judged. We'll then tell the steward, who'll let the head judge know, okay, we push, or these are the beers we want in the mini best of show round. And it may be like we found 3 we really think, and when I say mini best of show or second round, we're picking the beers we think of what we judge should win, has a possibility of winning a ribbon. Okay? So we'll say, well, we found 3 we think has a good chance of winning something. The other table may say, you know what, we didn't have as many of the good ones, but we found 2 we really, really, really liked. And so we'll tell the steward, we'll let the head judge know, like, hey, there's the 12 beers, we now have 5 beers have a chance of winning a ribbon. Okay? Those 5 beers, and let's say, and generally speaking, for Rendezbrew, we try to get, if we're doing 4 categories, we're actually doing it will be like, again, these, like for the example I'm talking about, these 12 beers judged to 5, and from 5 we'll pick first, second, and third. Normally for that session, and let's say it's Case and Randy and it's Matt and I, more than likely than not, it'll be Case as a national judge, myself as a certified judge. We'll do the mini best of show, so we don't overly geek it up. But also for the brewer, it's more important. It's like that you have a high quality judge, so there's no tinkering, bias, anything like this. So between the 5,
you didn't just grab 2 people off the street and said, "Do this."
Exactly. So the 5, we'll try. First, when you do the first 6 beers, you get the full judging sheet filled out. Second, the mini best of show, basically we just make a few notes, and because the critical part's really been done at this point in time. So what we're doing is like, okay, these 5, we really dig these 3, and then it's like, who do we like first, second, third? Once that decision's made, then the judge knows. There's the third bottles normally enter 3 bottles for competition. The third bottle's still back in storage because it's now going to be a bottle used for the best of show table, and that only gets brought out at the time the best of show judging takes place. And then if it's really, really good and really, really good at best of show, that bottle kind of gets finished somehow, some way, some form.
Beer has a way of disappearing at a judging event.
One of the funniest things to watch, for those who are watching who've never been to watch a homebrew, just watch some homebrew judging, it is so worth it. If for no other reason, You may have, let's say, a room full of tables, people judging beer, and word gets around about a good beer. All of a sudden, you watch people swat to the table. You have any extra? It's almost like, Mister, can I have a few drops of this, please?
Yep.
So that word gets out. And this, one of the other fun parts of being a steward, or the heroic parts of being a steward, you can go to the other table and say, you try this beer. So
You make people's day that way.
you do. But I love the fact when you watch people, like, you have like a handful of tables around, and all of a sudden the word's out about a good beer, and all of a sudden, like, you'll see that bottle circulate. Almost everybody's trying it.
Yep. Everybody's trying to, one, taste a good beer, but also, two, try to figure out what it is about that beer.
Exactly.
So you're coming up on a session day. How do you prepare for a judging session? Do you gather up any materials to have ready at the judging session?
I have actually my little bag I take with me, which has like a little flashlight in case I get overly geeky as far as color or clarity of a beer. Eraser too. Most people like mechanical pencils. I hate them with a passion, so I have like a dozen number 2 grade pencils and a sharpener in my little bag. I bring my own bottle of water, even though there should be water there, but just in case, have some water there. I have a printed out copy of the style guideline. Though you can also get it online. There's apps. In fact, BJCP.org there's like 3 or so apps where you can pull down the guidelines. The cool part about the guidelines, BJCP made an arrangement for anybody who wants to create the app or share it with folks. They can't charge for it, so it's always going to be a free app for you. But that way, this is obviously a lot easier than turning pages, and for me, sometimes spilling beer on a page. But that's usually about all I bring. I don't try to get too caught up. I do have some other geeky little things. Like I actually have an aroma wheel for beer that I show, but don't use it because then when you get, I think, too caught up in the minutia. Again, what I talked about before, when you get too caught up in the minutia, you forget why you're there. It's like, just tell me why. I'm telling you why I like a beer and why I don't like a beer. That's it. I don't carb load. I don't adjust my palate with a few beers before a judging session. Because it's easier just to come in, for lack of better terms, come in blind trying the beer. Trying the beer blind anyway. So I'd rather say, hey, you have a porter, here's the entry number. Okay, you look up porter and go from there. That's basically my day. And then I'll usually, right before the judging session, if let's say we're doing British ales, I'll briefly look through the category just sort of refresh my memory as far as the category itself. I'm still going to refer to it probably almost every entry, but at least it's like it's in my brain because there are just so many categories and subcategories, and there's little subtleties sometimes you just forget.
But you're not going to eat a big bowl of spicy chili right before you go judging. You're not going to smoke a big fat old cigar.
Wow.
Yeah.
No. You want to keep your palate as clean as possible. And generally speaking, your palate is its most effective in the morning. And ideally, roughly about 10 a.m., your palate's at its peak. That's that wonky kind of thing, but generally, your palate's better in the morning than the afternoon. You don't want to try to judge 80 beers in one day. Some people think they're heroic by doing it, but to be honest, after about 12 beers or so, max, your palate's killed. I mean, you're going to miss subtleties, you're going to miss a lot of stuff, and you'll actually overthink a lot of your beers at that point in time.
And depending on what you're judging too, like if you're judging nothing but smoked beers or whatever, it's probably less than 12.
Exactly. And that's one of those same kind of things where if the session is planned correctly, your morning session will tend to be lighter style beers. And if it's an afternoon session, maybe bigger beers because obviously bigger flavors, easier flavors to detect. And you don't kill your palate. If I start my day judging barley wine, it's my first judging session, I can't go judge light lagers in the second session because my palate's dead at that point in time.
But that might be a fun day.
Well, it's fun after one because I found a couple I like. See ya. So, but if it's planned right, it's kind of progressive. If there's a word of advice, you're not a hero trying to sit down and like 8 flights of beer in one day because after about 3 flights max, your palate is literally gone. So you may think you're a hero. It doesn't help the situation. More importantly, it doesn't help the brewer who wants to feedback on his entry. And that's what you're as a judge, your first mission, besides drinking good beer, is you're giving good, honest feedback to the brewer about his beer. And that's what I'd say. Ideally, theoretically, that's what the brewer wants first. They want the feedback first, And obviously in a metal wood, it's just a benefit.
So on a score sheet, you know, certified type one like this, what is the least important thing that's on the score sheet to a judge? Like what area will affect you the least amount overall?
Appearance that you feel like appearance.
Some beers just look bad and taste good. And sometimes the bad part is, and it's why I said it is this. First and foremost,
It's worth 3 points.
it's 3 points, though it actually can have a ripple effect for other points.
Yes.
But the bad part is, it's of the categories you look at, 5 areas you're writing comments on, it's the one you have the least amount of comments. You just like, clarity good, head good, color good. 3 points. Or because someone's like,
Clear, off-white head.
because some people are just geeky this way. Good. 2 points out of 3 just because I'm peeing on you because I'm a judge. It happens.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of feedback you get unless there's something just really bad. Like if it's supposed to be, let's say, a lump lager that has floaties, yeah, that's a problem. And I'd make that comment. But outside of that, you're not gaining a lot out of there unless, like I said, if the mark of the beer is way too dark, or you have absolutely no head at all. It's either the beer is flat or there's some type of problem, and it could be a recipe formulation problem. But I think, in my opinion, it's just the brewer get the least feedback in this particular category.
I think, and this is just kind of me outside the box there, and I don't have a ton of experience, you know, I've helped judge 2 Lunar Rendezbrews and a couple other little small things. But as far as appearance, though, I can see it having an effect because that's the first thing that you experience with a beer, right? And like you said, it does have a little bit of a ripple effect, and I think that some people can kind of do it a little bit more harshly, like it starts setting the tone for negativity.
Exactly. I don't disagree. That happens. Like you pour me a beer, 9 times out of 10, and you usually see this with, let's say, bigger style beers that are young, like a barley wine, for example. When it's a baby, there's like no head to the beer. So you're looking at it, and without even smelling, tasting, and you're already thinking it's a flat beer, it's not carbonated. Well, no, just it's a baby, hadn't opened up yet.
Sure.
And so you've already made those kind of decisions before you even tried the beer. Parents, like what you're saying, Matt, same kind of thing. I mean, I look at this beer, and I see little floaties. I'm already thinking, without even sniffing, tasting this beer at all, I'm thinking, yeah, there's problems with this beer, and I'm already thinking 25 or below. And I haven't even had a chance to even take a sip of the beer. Or maybe it's a bottle-conditioned beer, just have a little age to it. It's not that big of a deal. It may not be that big of a deal, but it does kind of set the tone a lot of times for judges.
I don't disagree with you. I actually got a score sheet back earlier this year. It was a 17 on my blender wise, and I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing and the deadlines and all that other stuff, and so I bottle conditioned my blender wise 2 weeks before tournament. And
see the results.
And you could tell. And so like the biggest comment on, especially right there on appearance, it was beer's flat, totally ruined the experience. And you could just tell going down line by line that like, carbonation would have made this, better. And this like everywhere they felt like they could ding me for that. Like it was there. And it's my own fault, right? And that beer ended up doing better later on in the circuit, and we'll talk about a similar situation like that here in a little bit. But I was like, I really wanted to hit myself with a shovel over that, especially seeing it on the score sheet.
Well, the bad thing, again, peeling back years, most entries when I first started judging were bottle conditioned, so it was not uncommon. Where now, because of advanced techniques, equipment, et cetera, your beers that most homebrewers are turning in now are actually pretty close to commercial grade as far as the appearance and everything else. So it doesn't have, you don't see it as much. So when you do see a bottle conditioned beer, unless the judge really knows it's a bottle conditioned beer, told us a bottle conditioned beer, some judges are like, oh, bottle conditioned, kick ass. And some judges are like, bottle conditioned, ding, 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 ding.
How much sampling of a particular brew actually happens at a table between, let's just say, 2 judges? Because we have seen some tables where there's 3 or 4 judges that are just trying to fill out a session until another session happens later that afternoon or whatever the case may be. But if there's just two people at the table, how much of my entry at that table is actually judged?
Well, actually judged.
Actually judged.
If it's good, consumed all of it. But okay, judge-wise, when you pour the sample, normally it's about an ounce or so, ounce and a half in its cup. The cup typically is going to be a 69-ounce cup, ideally with not too much of a flare, so the aroma can be kind of trapped. But about an ounce, ounce and a half gives you plenty sample, plenty to get the aroma and taste of beer itself. Now you still may add some to it. That's why, as I mentioned, would be like I pour the sample, put the cap back on, so I'm going to come back and resample it. Like, let's say, for example, I think it's just you and I judging, and we're 8 points off.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go back and try the beer again, so we're going to see why we're 8 points off.
Yeah.
So that's why port rye, caps on, we'll come back to it. It hadn't changed that much, so we can start dialing in why we have an 8-point difference. Again, some beers, and your Verona West is a good example. Bottle condition, a lot of things that are happening is living, growing, and breathing. So it's like, you know what? Sometimes it just has to slow down a little bit, and that's what helps. It helps in terms of, again, closing that gap. So that's just 9 times out of 10, just throw numbers out. But generally speaking, an ounce, ounce and a half or so, you're good to go. Some pour a little bit more, some pour a little bit less is not enough. You need, I would say, at least a good ounce, ounce and a half to let the beer open up.
Sure.
Some will pour 3 to 4 ounces. I try to make sure there's at least half a bottle left when you pour, so that way if you have to go back to it, we can go back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, if it's really good, then I hold on to the bottle.
Yeah. Yeah. That goes on the other side of the table.
Exactly. When they say, where'd that beer go?
Goes to the bank.
There you go, to the bank.
Let's see here. Well, I guess you just answered the second part of that question is can you go back and have more? You certainly can.
You should sit at a judging session anticipating what beer I'm sampling. I may have to sample again.
Yes.
And what you don't want to do, because let's again go back to that example, we walked through the beers. 2 or 3 bottles come that judging session. I can't open the second bottle because if I open the second bottle, let's say this beer wins or has a high score in the first round. I don't have anything to sample for many best of show. So I've actually punished a brewer because we got too caught up in it. This happens at times. It's rare, but it does happen with some of the judges where they sample, and all of a sudden it's like, you now sampled the whole beer. So you need to either make a decision or screw the brewer.
Yes.
That.
So as a beer judge, are you constantly judging things whenever you're drinking it? So, like today, we're sitting here, we're talking about judging beer, and you go to sip your beer. Are you judging that? Do you have an on-off switch about it? Or is it just all kind of just experience points building up?
Generally speaking, like, for example, if I go to one of the local breweries here, and I've never tried some of the beers, I'll put them in the judging cap to try to figure what I like or don't like about them. That's why a lot of times a brewery I first visit, since I'll offer like samplers, I'll sample 3, 4, 5 of the beers, where the sample is. For the same kind of reason, can they, I may find within these like 4 beers, man, this one's really, really, really good. Maybe let's say they do an IPA that's just outstanding. They do a lager or they do a Kolsch, which is forward. Well, I know that I'm not going to lean on this brewery for lighter style beers. I will go for hop-headed beers or some of the heavier hand beers they make because that seems to be their comfort zone or their best brewing zone. So judging hats on for something like that. I don't normally walk into a bar and say, okay, I want to give me a pint of this and then put on a judging hat. Unless for some reason I feel I must do that. Usually if I'm out to have a beer, I'm out to have a beer. Judging is like, it's a war, and having a beer is I'm just enjoying a beer. I may subconsciously kind of judge the beer. It's like, I don't like this beer because, but it's not I'm not gonna break down everything. It's like, yeah, this beer tastes flat, or, this beer is oxidized. But outside of that, I don't get it. I'm not gonna sit there and do a breakdown and say, sir, your beer's a 17. Get it.
You don't walk around with your little backpack on with all your
little flashlight and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. No, but it is like a lot of, and again, same thing. If I'm going to a brewery for the first time, I went to Albuquerque recently. And went to 4 breweries I'd obviously never been to before. So the judging hat was on there in the sense of just getting a good feel like, what's the strengths or weaknesses of this brewery? Because my brother recently moved there, so I'm going to go see him again. Okay, we're going to this brewery and that brewery, we're not going there, kind of thing. But at that time I will. That's nature, kind of nature my beast. But it's not. I have no problem with it on. I'll switch that way.
Sure.
And a lot of it I think is more because I've been judging for so long. it's easy to do that on off. If you're just getting into judging, most folks when they're getting into judging, that judging light is on all the time.
It is though, because I'm like, is this a classic example? Is this what I should be aiming for? How close is this? And granted, I mean, with commercial brews, they don't have to brew to BJCP style guidelines, right? Those are kind of like, this is just a program where everybody's came together and says a beer should smell like this, it should taste like this, it should look like this, it should exemplify these characteristics and all that. And it doesn't matter if it's one of the big major breweries in America or the small craft brewery across town or the only one that you might have in town. They don't have to adhere to that. We're entering these competitions saying, I can brew that beer, or I can get close to that beer, or let me see how close I can get to that beer. And so, I do find myself, though, with like commercial beers and just beers that people hand me to taste at Homebrew Club and all that. How close is this? Can I get closer? Is this a classic example? Is this, do I like this beer? That kind of thing. And so I'm hope one day it'll turn off. I'm decent at it, at being able to say, you know what? Today I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to drink my favorite beer, and I'm not going to worry about any off flavor that it might have.
Well, that's one of the good parts with the BJCP. When we talk about different categories and subcategories, we'll identify commercial examples. So what's available. I think I want to brew this beer, so I like what they're talking about, and go, if it's available, here's a commercial example to try for good, bad, and different.
Yeah.
And you're in the same kind of thing. Even when you have someone sharing their homebrew, I think I want to brew this beer. The first thing you're doing that basic judging again. I kind of like this. I want to brew something like this. And then, of course, then you'll be like, but I'm going to do it with chickens, no fermentation, and I'm going to ferment at 110 degrees and see what happens.
So sometimes I found, just being the oddball, it's best just to not tell people what you've done until after they've tasted the beer. I found that, like, if you're like, hey, I didn't boil this, and I fermented it at 99 degrees, and whatever else crazy thing that I might have done, there has not been a chicken in any beer yet.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. But to just not tell anybody, just say, here, try this or whatever. And to tell you the truth, honestly, chasing some of these BJCP styles and stuff like that, I've kind of reined it back in a little bit and said, okay, like, I've got to focus more on my fermentation temperatures. I've got to do some different things. I just recently brewed a raw ale. I no-chilled it, and I just let it go. I pasteurized the wort, but I didn't boil, and I think it's going to turn out to be a great beer.
And that's the cool part. The best part when you don't tell them what you've done, like you just mentioned, particularly because I know you like to go outside the walls, which is wonderful, is listening to the feedback. Like, well, you should have done this and this and this. Well, no. You should have fermented this temperature. Well, no. You should have done this in your boil. Well, it wasn't boiled, so whoops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. It's like, just give me honest feedback, what you like or don't like, instead of trying to get too hyper, watch me show how much I know or don't know about the brewing process.
Yeah. Yeah. So real quick, we'll just do this question, and then we'll take a break. Get a refill. I'm empty. You're getting there. But you've done most of the talking. I've been doing most of the drinking. So.
Yeah.
So being BJC certified, are you able to brew more than, or are you able to judge more than just homebrew competitions? Are you limited by region, state, nationally? Can you judge worldwide?
BJCP itself is universal, so you can judge all sorts of places. One of the couple of our members who now live in Europe are very active in judging around Europe, so you can actually go wherever. The other cool part, which you'll find, what I found, I'll put it that way, a lot of folks who they said never actually taken tests or gotten certified as far as a judge, you get that BJCP certification, I was like, man, what else can I do? And they'll look again like a meat certification or a cider certification. Or, like one couple went and got chili certification. They're casting certified for chili competitions. Just because, like, man, I kind of dig this aspect of breaking down what that
Famous.
still.
Yeah.
And so, because you're applying the same kind of principle, right? Like, what are you tasting, what are you smelling, and what you like or don't like. So the principles aren't that different. It's fun to watch folks like just expand the horizons because they're comfortable doing that.
Yes.
The hardest part to get people to, in my opinion, the hardest part, and that's why I like working with first-time judges, is when you tell them, like, all you got to do is tell me why you like it and why you don't like it. That's really what is, in the simple terms, that's what judging is about. Once you get comfortable just doing that, everything else falls into place. And as you gain experience, and it can be like, okay, I'm getting this, but now I know because of my brewing and all this stuff, now I know more why, and I can help explain why. But the first part is just the first step, slide, just like swimming, first got to get in the pool. It's the idea, like, just give them generalize what you like and don't like. Because as a brewer, you should have a good gist of what they're saying. They may not know how to say it yet, and that's okay. It's part of the process.
Yeah, gaining the vocabulary is part of the experience, and
Some people get too caught up trying to use the terms of art immediately. It's like you don't even know why you're saying what you're saying.
right, yeah,
Just dial it back. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like.
right. Hell, I didn't know what a dry beer was until Nuts and Bolts a few years ago, and then we brewed a bunch of Belgians, and then I was like, oh, dry phenolic, yes. Oh my God, yes. And I don't know what you like until you try it, right?
Exactly.
So let's grab another pint and reset everything, and we'll be right back. We're back. Took a little break. I got a little snack here. This is pretty delicious. So, how do you judge for a competition, and are you only judging for certain competitions, for certain circuits? How do you do that?
I pretty much now, since I've judged for so long and I'm old, and I can be this way.
Be honorary.
I'm invested in Rendezbrew because I kind of started the club, so I make sure Rendezbrew is successful that way. I'll judge local competitions. I don't travel unless all of a sudden, for some reason, I want to travel to judge somewhere. But usually it's like, per the program, all I need technically to maintain my status is judge at least one competition every other year.
Every other year?
Every other year. So it's like I do Rendezbrew every year. Dixie Cup, I usually do a session or so with them. Big Batch, which is Northside KGB,
Yeah.
Northside competition. I usually judge there. I haven't judged the last couple of years, but they've been kind of off and on. That's a COVID thing. And then during, was it 2 years ago? 3 years ago? 2 years ago. The COVID judging for Blue Bonnet, we were able to do some remote time judging. I did judge that. But outside of that, pretty much just stay here because there is plenty within the Lonestar circuit within just here to judge.
Yeah.
Unless all of a sudden it's like, and I've done that before, I've judged at Cerveza Fest when it first started, it's like, hey, weekend in San Antonio, can't be a bad thing.
No. Yeah, and the Lone Star circuit's a pretty big circuit. It's pretty competitive. There's a lot of good brewers on this circuit. One day I'm going to be one of the good ones.
With your chickens.
With my chicken. That's it. I got to do it now.
So the cool, just saying that, it's actually kind of the cool part where, like, you got some folks, depending on where they're at, let's say, an example, hypothetically, someone who's a certified judge who lives in Montana who may not have that many opportunities to judge may make that trip to Washington, Colorado, or somewhere else to judge some of those competitions just to get us points. And some people, like I said, I shouldn't say this way. My opinion is more like I'll go judge outside the state if I'm tying it in with having some fun doing something. I'm not that type of judge. I'm not traveling these spots because I'm a judge. I'm traveling there because I enjoy the area, enjoy the breweries, or enjoy like the club that's hosting the competition, and by the way, judge beer as well.
Right.
Except at that point right now. Now years ago, when I first started judging, when I first was certified, I'd look and do a little more traveling. But again, still within the state because Lone Star Circuit was just hadn't quite started yet, but kind of was just like unwritten kind of Lone Star Circuit. Then occasional judging stuff in Louisiana. But it wasn't, everything wasn't as coordinated, generally speaking, for BJCP and the American Homebrewers. It was there, but it was kind of like I get that odd invite. Hey, if you want to travel to New Hampshire, come judge up here. I'm like,
No.
I'm not flying to New Hampshire to judge up here. So
Right.
there's enough here where I don't have to do that. And for some folks, depending on where they're at, then they have to travel to go do some judging to get things done that way.
Sure.
And some just enjoy it. I mean, it's not that I don't enjoy judging. It's one of those that I'm now past the point where I'm going to judge every weekend somewhere. If I do a weekend trip, it's not necessarily to judge a beer. If that's part and parcel of it, yay, but more like I'm going to travel because I'm going somewhere to have some fun.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, kind of turn it in part of the trip for like San Antonio or
Right.
whatever. Yeah.
There's enough cool spots in the Lonestar circuit, actually, and
Yeah.
the Bayou circuit, the Louisiana group, basically, where it's like, here's a fun, cool trip to New Orleans or nearby or whatever like this, where it's like, I don't have to go like a judge in this area. Doesn't have to travel far to judge some good beers, enjoy some good beers, and enjoy a great city. So, I mean,
Kind of hits a lot
the
of
good part is you don't have to do that unless you want to.
Sure. So here's a fun question. Do you remember the best and the worst entries that you have ever judged?
Actually, I saw this question earlier and I laughed because I actually do, and that's the scary part. Because again, just to let you know, I'm old. I've been judging for over 30 years. My BJCP number starts with an A. Well, most folks are like F, G, and H or later. So that's how long I've been involved. The best beer I ever judged, and this was one of the early years of Rendezbrew. This had been in the mid-90s. There was a brewer from Beaumont. I don't remember the name of the club at the time. He made an ice bock that was better than EKU 28. That was better than any ice bock we'd actually touch, feel in this area. It was incredible. Incredible. Never forget that. We'll never be able, I won't find another 50-point beer. Though, again, because I'm plugging Randy Daly today, Brixie got a 50-point beer in one of the competitions. So it's kind of a neat, was it Optum, I think?
Yeah. Often.
Which is, that's a great competition with great judges. So to have some really great judges say, Randy, that's a perfect beer. That is awesome. So yay, Randy.
And the competition in that, or the competitors in that competition are like no other. And that's normally the first competition on the circuit too for it. So everybody's like gun ho. This is the best of the best coming out, all brand new fresh beer, or
That's what makes it so much more incredible. It's like you're made with perfect beer, and again, amongst all these awesome brewers and all these great judges. I mean, that's phenomenal. But we have one, like I said, the one judge, and the guy was judging with another certified judge. Took a sip and said, "This beer is just so good." That's why I'll never forget that. Now the worst beer, I've had numerous bottles that open and basically little volcanoes
geysers.
that blow up everywhere, like that literally will empty the bottle. That I literally couldn't judge. But I guess only because the story to it was fun. One of the early years for Big Batch Brew Bash, the KGB competition, we were judging at St. Arnold. This was the original St. Arnold location. It was IPAs. And this brewer got this IPA and opened it, and again, it started gushing. But it wasn't the normal, like, little volcano gushing. It was like these big bubbles popping up, going off. And I'm sitting there just looking at it, and I started writing. And of course, for those who don't know me, I'm kind of a smart ass. So I looked at it and said, okay, I guess this guy didn't know Cascades means hops, not dishwashing detergent. It was like what you open a bottle of Cascade, you watch little bubbles popping up. That's what it was.
Oh man.
We couldn't drink it. It was not a good beer, but it was one of those where the first time I ever seen like these bubbles, literally like a little game taking place. That was by far the worst beer.
At what point does the subjectivity check out? How do judges check their own personal biases at the door?
Ideally, they do it all the time. Okay. But obviously, it won't happen. Like I mentioned before, the dog judging kind of thing. If I'm judging Cocker Spaniels and other breeds of dogs that will tend to lean, it can be either hypercritical or more forgiving for a Cocker Spaniel because I breed those dogs. Judging may have certain categories, like, for example, let's say I'm a brewer who makes the best porter in America. I will tend to be either hypercritical or more lenient for porters I'm judging for that reason. So the hard part is for a judge is to separate yourself. And one of the ways is just not judge category, obviously. or avoid it.
Jose avoids ambers because of that. He says it's his favorite style, and he does not want to see it ruined, and so he just doesn't judge.
And that's what you kind of should, unless you're like, okay, I should stop here. Now, I don't brew that much now. I'll help out. I'll show up at Randy Daly's house again, and I'll drop in a couple pellets of hops that have contributed. But the whole point is where it's like, I've judged long enough where it's like, I don't get too subjective in that sense. But it's probably the hardest thing for a judge. That's probably the hardest thing for a judge to do as they're learning, is to, because they want to judge their favorite styles of beer, more likely than not, because it's a comfort zone for them. But the bad part is they can be either hypercritical or hyper forgiving, which doesn't make you, bottom line, you're not helping the brewer get information that well. So ideally judge, and again, that comes a lot of times with experience. You just learn like, okay, once the game faces on, here's my water, here's my sample, all the subjectivity has to go away at that point in time.
What's your favorite style to judge, and why is it?
I really, really like, generally speaking, British style beers I love. Grew up with them. We had a pub that recently closed, Baby Duck. It was the only place outside the loop where you can get Fuller's beers. So go there all the time. I love British beers. I like the subtleties of them. Now, that being said, again, I really admit I'm a hophead as well. Excuse me. But the point is, like, I could judge British beers all day, all night. And that's everything from mild ales to barley wines. I mean, the whole spectrum. I just like British beers. So anytime I have an opportunity to judge them, I'm jump all over. So if there's a specific style in British beers, and since I've mentioned probably 23 times by now, I love to judge porters. I love porters, probably the best. And I enjoy judging them because there's a subtle difference in a really good porter and a porter that needs a little work. And it usually deals with like the darker malts. It's getting that blend of like subtle roast and chocolate and those subtle flavors that sometimes get overdone one way or the other, which separates that 40-point porter from a 30 to 33-point porter. So,
what's your least favorite style to judge, and why?
Okay. And kind of mentioned already, light lagers.
Yeah.
Probably my absolute least favorite. And the main reason is, again, this is another common thing we've kind of touched upon. Everybody's hypersensitive to certain things. And sometimes they get apologetic. You don't get apologetic. Everybody's hypersensitive to certain flavor components, things like this.
I am unapologetic about my ginger sensitivity.
There you go.
It just is who I am.
And the best part is once you know that, it's all good.
Yeah.
Okay. So the same kind of sense. Generally speaking, very light lagers, very subtle light lagers. I always get a note of like green peas. I get this real light vegetal note in all these beers. It's a hypersensitivity to a chemical, and I'm not a chemist, not a scientist. I'm going to try to guess at it. I just know when I smell green peas. And so it's kind of like, man, I don't want to judge this beer because I don't want to beat you up for something that I'm just hypersensitive to. So I will try to avoid it as much as possible. I can judge it, but I won't judge it unless the other person I'm judging with is very good at light lagers, because I don't want to punish the brewer for my hypersensitivity. So I try to avoid it at all costs. And saying that, I'm one of those judges who has no problem judging wheat beers, where most all judges, particularly when they get started, fear wheat beers and never want to judge wheat beers. So I'm like, I'll do those. You judge my light lagers, I'll judge your wheat beers.
What's the problem with wheat beers?
Wheat beers, one of the first problems generally is that there's different yeasts that you use in wheat. Some encourage more of that fruity, bubblegummy kind of note, banana, bubblegum, things like this. And other yeast strains plant more of the sort of push forward some of the phenolics and push forward some spicy note. Okay, Schneiderweiss, for example, their wheat beers tend to be spicy, which for people who like wheat beers because they're fruity and bubblegummy and stuff, they don't like. But I'm like, man, I can dig this over that. But I understand the difference between the two. So that being said, a lot of folks just don't like, because phenolics tend to be fairly high in wheat beers, generally. So a lot of folks, that's a flavor component, a note component, and even an aroma component, where it's kind of like you just don't want to deal with it. And in fact, some of the judges will tell you, it's actually, technically, it's a flaw in the beer. It's an infection, but it's a yeast-driven, quote-unquote, infection. So it's one of those where it's like, best way to put it, it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
So you like it for that reason, you don't like it for that reason, which is fine. And so for that kind of reason, I don't have a problem judging because I understand here's what's different about them. Whereas some people just like, I just don't want to deal with them. And I'm okay with that. For the same reason I don't want to deal with white lagers, well, hypersensitivity, I totally appreciate folks say, you know what, I can't judge these beers fair. A lot of folks who don't like to judge wheat beers will tell you right up front, I can't judge it fairly. And I'm like, I'd rather you say that versus trying to work your way through wheat beers just because you want to get a fine beers judged.
I can see how like phenolics would be off-putting to people that definitely don't enjoy them. Like I have a beer pen pal, and he just sent me a Hefeweizen, homebrew Hefeweizen of his, and man, I tell you what, it had the banana, and it dove off into the clove, and in my opinion, it was perfect in every which way. It was just something that I felt like was a very good example of a Hefeweizen, and he got dinged all over the place because of the phenolics or the banana ester. Too much, too little, and so it's definitely a fine line with those wheat beers for sure.
Right, because it's canned. It's kind of like, they're both right. It's the same thing we talk about generally speaking. If you look at the styles and the guidelines, they're broad enough because they have these kind of differences. And you accept the differences versus, yeah, I'm a spice guy, so I'm not a banana guy. Or I'm a banana guy, so I'm not a spice guy. It's like,
I've heard it said, banana does not belong in my beer.
I heard too, and I smiled and waved and say, walk away.
Right.
But again, and that's no problem. It's like, well, just don't judge this style because obviously there's a bias that you can't overcome.
So, talking about palates and tasting and all that, what do judges use to cleanse their palate? And is it standardized across all competitions from your experience?
It's almost standardized now. Generally speaking, there's always water. There should always be water at the table, obviously, to help cleanse your palate. Then some competitions use some bread, baguettes, whatever like this. We tend to use oyster crackers. You want something fairly bland. Obviously, something just sort of clean the palate. The bad part sometimes with a baguette, for example, a fresh baguette, you're still going to have some yeasty notes to it, which you don't realize because it's fresh and crusty and nice to chomp on. But the bad part is you'll pick up some yeast notes in the beers. It's anything you do or anything with the beer, it's the nature of the yeast of the bread itself. Just the same as like some folks, like generally speaking, on the sample glass, a lot of times you'll mark it's beer number 1 or entry number with like a Sharpie. Well, unless you give the Sharpie time to actually let the air get out, you'll smell the Sharpie as you smell the beer. So
smell affects your taste. It's like,
well, it's the first thing I pick up. So now I pick up beer, take a sample, I take a whiff, and I smell the Sharpie. I'm not thinking about the Sharpie, generally speaking, or the judge generally speaking. They're thinking about there's a weird smell of beer I don't like. There's an acetone kind of note, which again on the judging sheet's a flaw. So now all of a sudden there's a flaw, and now to roll into different aspects of what you're judging. So even using a grease pencil, which is the next alternative, you don't really get that subtly. Generally speaking, like when I judge, it's like if I'm judging only 6 to 8 beers, I don't need numbers on the glasses. I can line a glass left to right.
Yeah.
And ideally, I don't spill it, so it's all good that way.
If it's a long enough table.
Yeah. Or enough elbow room, yeah.
So here's gonna be a question that I think is multi-answered, multi-layered, and all that. I brewed a beer. I entered it. It scored a 17. Later on that year, started scoring upper mid-30s into the 40s. Mini best of show. What has happened to this beer and a few other examples like it to me? What's going on with this?
Okay. First and foremost, a couple different things, more likely than not. First one I would say would be check the bottle. If you got a 17, then we'll say, and I don't know the time frame, we'll say it's a month later you get a 30. More likely than not, there's a problem with the bottle that affected the beer. Okay? Some styles of beer, some styles of beer just need time to age. It's not uncommon. Let's say you brew a fairly fresh beer, you enter it, and it hadn't really opened up yet. So what happens is you're getting your dirties. The good beer, I can enjoy it, but it's not going to the next round. Now it's given time to open up, because again, beer, like wine, it's a living, breathing thing. As it ages, starts to open up. All of a sudden now all the subtleties come out. We had a brewer, in fact, we're talking about this off air, that did a double bock, and he entered it for nuts and bolts, and I went for one. But it was a very good double bock. It was a baby. It needed time to open up. So within 6 months later, he took medals at, I think, Blue Bond, if I remember right, and Rendezbrew, or at least 2 of the competitions where that same beer, just given time to open up within the bottle, the scores got better, the beer won awards. So that's actually fairly common, because with the number of competitions, a lot of times you're getting your beers, you're brewing them, you're getting the bottles fast as possible, because you got to get out of competitions. So sometimes, again, depending on the style of beer, it needs time to open up. So that's a lot of times what happens with beers.
Have you ever had anybody contact you after receiving back their score sheet? And how often do you think that this is actually a thing? You know, because like on the score sheets, we have to write our name, and then if we have a BJCP ID number, and then contact information. Right? And I guess that's partially one, to hold you accountable if you're being over abusive to the score sheet, but also to just be able to track who's doing what. But is it a thing to reach out to a judge?
In all the years I've judged, I've had one person contact me, and that was early days. And I couldn't, to be honest, I don't remember the conversation. If your competition's done right, if your steward's doing his job, your head judge is doing his job, because we actually should look at the score sheets to look for reasons for some type of a callback, some type of complaint. If there's a complaint about a judge's sheet, most folks contact the competition directly instead of the judge directly.
Sure.
And your most common complaint is usually not like, this is an abusive judge. It's usually a judge who doesn't write squat. Okay? Tell me, I paid $12 for an entry, let's say, and you tell me, beer looks good, beer tastes good, thank you, it's $25. You're not telling me anything. And again, ideally, when you're judging these beers, what the brewer wants, again, aside from the metal, they want feedback. And when you're not providing feedback, that tends to be the more common complaint. As far as the individual judge, it's like, this guy's not giving me feedback. Okay? So that's really where it comes from. Still don't hear a lot, but my experience has been, generally speaking, is that if there's complaints about judging, they'll deal with the director of the competition, deal with that person directly, versus making like a fight with the individual judge.
Let the competition handle it between.
It's the best way to be diplomatic about it, because it's one of those, let's say, for example, someone doesn't like a score I gave them. If they reach out to me from Rendezbrew and said, you suck as a judge, and just berate me, part of me is saying, man, if I find you here anywhere, everywhere, I'm going to piss on it now, because you dissed me this way. That's why usually it's usually handled a little more diplomatically than that. Our first year of Rendezbrew, as a matter of fact, there was an entry that was sent from Michigan that didn't do well. Okay, now part of it obviously was traveling from Michigan down to here, and at that time Rendezbrew was in Albany, so it was traveling in hot weather. The beers didn't do well. Don't remember what the beer did. I know it didn't do well. Person, it wasn't actually the brewer, it was the brewer's wife who lodged a complaint. I'm trying to remember. It was done pseudo publicly, but I can't remember, like a chat group or what. I don't know exactly where it got lodged. I remember off the top of my head.
Back then, when it had been telegrams?
Probably. The coolest part about the complaint was we did, within hours of her complaint, it was actually folks from the local clubs here, Foam Rangers, KGB, who actually basically stood up for her and said, we know the people there, because her point was they're just biased because they're from Michigan. Like, first, someone had to explain, it's judge blind, we don't know who did what, but more importantly, they said, it's not something the club said, and reminded her, you sent your beer in the middle of summer to Texas. So it was kind of neat to watch that we didn't have to really deal with it, that it was actually dealt with. The idea being like the community knew the club walks. They're like, we're picking someone up and screwing them over. So
Not only that, but like another club could have actually helped judge that beer for that competition, because
Right.
a lot of that happens. I know CIA, KGB. A lot of these clubs that we have here locally will help us come
Right.
judge Lunar, and we help them.
Usually I'll chip in and help the community. Again,
Yeah.
the community sort of helps each other out in that
Yes,
sense.
and so like you said, judging blind. I mean, it could have been anybody that judged it, not just Bam.
But that was that lesson. I mean, like I said, to me the best part was that we didn't have to defend our competition. Others defended for us because they knew, and they knew beer judge. They knew how beers are judged at a competition. Where obviously it's like this brewer's wife did know the process, which is upset her husband didn't win an award, I guess.
So as an entrant, if you get a score sheet back and it speeds you up for a character that's actually supposed to be in that brew, say for example, a saison, it's supposed to have phenolics, it's supposed to be esteries, all those kind of deals. What do you do as an entrant? Do you complain? Do you just write it off? Do you have options to complain? Or like what do you do?
If it's a flavor component that should be in the beer, I mean, you just take it with a grain of salt. You just read and say, okay, maybe the judge had a bad day, whatever. I mean, there's that. You can complain, but it won't. You're not going to get a medal because you complain.
Right.
It doesn't change it. Sometimes that happens. In fact, one of the better brewers, I made a comment. I evidently didn't write the comment correctly about a double block. He says, "You said I need more caramel." I said, "That's not what I meant. So I must have written something wrong." That happens. It's one of those. If I turned in a beer, let's use this as an example that a phenolic is expected, and have a judge beating it up because there's a phenolic in there. Back of your brain said, okay, well, I watched this judge. I can't trust this judge, right? Because if he doesn't know that, or doesn't look at the guideline at least to make sure what should be there, what shouldn't be there, there's a problem. I can complain. But that'd be one of those, say with the judge directly, maybe the competition, hey, just letting you know, water under the bridge now, but just a note is that
Maybe this person should.
I have a judge that complained about a flavor component that should be in the beer. Because it could be, for example, say hypothetically, that it's the judge who's not in the program or not certified judge who was trying to help out, don't know who is at the table. Okay, let's say if you're a non-certified or above judge, let's say there was one at the table who didn't say, hey, it should be there. Didn't correct it, there's a problem at the table. That's when those at the competition, and they can just pull the guys aside, hey, guys kind of screwed this ballot, be careful. And again, that happens.
Sure.
Yeah, we're all not, well, most of them aren't perfect. So.
So how important is it to take into account flight placement in the flight? I've heard it said before that you sometimes need to take it with a grain of salt if your entry is later in the flight versus earlier in the flight.
True, and that happens. It's one of those, like, for example, let's say we're judging a flight of 8 beers. Unless the first beer is like just world class off the bat, it will tend to get a little bit of lower score generally, only because you're still acclimating your palate. So you may be a little more critical of that first beer. That happens. It also may be as far as the placement. Like I said, remember we have 4 subcategories. Let's say 4 subcategories to a category. And usually it's from the lighter of the subcategories to the heavier of the subcategories. So there's a natural progression. If your beer wasn't identified right when you entered, or if they just didn't pay attention when they were sending the beers out, and let's say you got subcategory D instead of A at the beginning, you may throw the other beers off because you judge that bigger beer first. That happens. So, again, grain of salt. I, in fact, had that happen in meads in a good way. And I say that because it was traditional mead, and I made a hydromel, which is a very low gravity traditional mead. And they were setting them up because I could hear the table. I wasn't judging it, but I heard the table. and my mead was like the fourth or fifth one poured, and I just read and said, you can't do that fourth or fifth. That hydromel has to go first. If it doesn't, it will get crushed. They poured it first, and that hydromel took first place at Rendezbrew. So it would not have even gotten off the table if it had been tasted fourth or fifth. So it does happen. You try as a judge to not let it affect you. That's one of those. Generally, when I sit, what I'll do is I'll hear the beers for a category, and I'll sort of double check and make sure that here's the pouring order I want, like lighter to darker, heavier to lighter to heavier, less hoppy to more hoppy, whatever it may be as far as the category. The idea being to give my palate a chance for every beer to fully evaluate the beer itself. Not just like blindly saying, just bring me something, we'll try it. Because your palate won't adjust that way. Your palate doesn't adjust from heavy to light to heavy to light to heavy to light. You'll throw everything out of whack.
So you brought up an interesting point anyways, so you heard that your entry was being judged at a table across the way. So when you're judging brews, you're not allowed to be at the table that your brew is at, as far as at least this program is concerned.
Right.
But it is kind of sometimes a funny thing that if you know that your beer's on that table, or that table's judging your style, or you hear them talking about your beer because you're familiar with it, it's, of course you want to be respectful and not say anything, right? Like, and just kind of listen to how the judges are talking about the things that are coming across their style or their table or your beer, so that way you kind of get the raw data part of it, which is another reason to kind of sign up for your local homebrew club and try to get in and judge some of these things, so you can kind of enjoy some of those little small French benefits, right? But that was something that I actually meant to put here on the questions list, and I forgot to.
Well, and to be honest, I didn't know that was my hydromel.
Right.
I just knew, as far as this is mead, like same thing with subcategories. Hydromel is a low gravity mead. In traditional mead, it's got to be first because let's say a sack mead, which is a big high gravity mead, if it's a sack traditional, you're going to overwhelm the palate. So by the time mine gets, at that point, like I said, it was mine. I didn't know technically, but the point of it wasn't like pour my mead first. It's more like you have to pour the hydromel first. Same thing in the beers. I mean, in fact, this past Rendezbrew, we were judging, Jeremy and I, Jeremy, we're judging a style of beer, and when the judge at the table next to us, she had a beer entered in that category. So she didn't say anything, just listening and listening. Because she didn't know which beer it serves, obviously, but the whole point being like, she's like listening to the comments, goes, oh, very interesting, very interesting. It's like, is that an entry there? It's like, okay. That happens. That's why when you sign up, when you do your entries, they ask you, like, for judging, it's like, okay, tell us styles of beer you don't want to judge. Tell us styles of beer you want to judge. Do you have entries? So make sure you as a judge are put at a table. I mean, you don't want to be a brewer of an IPA and put at a table judging IPAs, because it doesn't even matter if yours is good, bad, or indifferent. The assumption is going to be, the inference is going to be that this is biased. And so the idea of this is to eliminate any type of bias.
Right.
And try to make it as easy as possible for the judges. If I don't want to judge light lagers, don't put me on a light lager table. Okay. And I've already told you that. Walking in, it's like, I won't judge this style. I don't like judging this style of beer. So, I mean, not if I'm absolutely forced to go to my head to judge the beer, it's not that I say I won't. But I'm letting you know, and I'm being fair to the brewer. I don't want to judge that style of beer. I try to avoid that situation.
I'm probably not ever going to be allowed to judge historical because I just keep playing around over there. But yeah, I can see where that would definitely cause some conflict and stuff like that. But it is kind of know that, hey, this table sitting next to me is judging something that I'm in, be it wheat beer or the historical or IPA or whatever, and so like you can't be there. Jeremy actually brought up a pretty good point. He said I don't want to be asked to judge best of show. He said, because if I'm asked, that means that my beer didn't make it.
Exactly. It's one of those people like, man, I'm judging best of show. Oh, I'm judging best of show.
Yeah. Reality check.
Exactly. You don't realize all of a sudden that I've seen it happen with folks. Man, I'm judging best of show. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it dawns on them.
Personal opinion: should judges specialize in only a few categories and judge only those particular categories?
I would say no. And the reason I'd say no is the whole idea of the BJCP, just like Homebrew, is the experience. It's not necessarily like I'm going to be the best IPA judge in the world. That's not the point of BJCP. It's actually about understanding beers. And again, it's a learning process. It's all
Sure.
about the whys and stuff. So the more I learn about different styles of beer, I may judge Argentinian lagers, let's say. Know nothing about them, but you know what? Amber lagers, not light lagers. But in nothing else, I'm learning about this style of beer. So that's a good thing. When you get too locked into, I'll only judge this or this or this, I personally think you kind of skew yourself and you kind of miss the boat on the good stuff. Like, hey, I've never judged these wood-aged beers, but man, this is a neat experience.
Yeah.
And you miss out on that. And again, if you're brewing and judging, which most folks do, it's one of those, you're also cheating yourself up, not have an opportunity of learning about a style of beer before you brew it. You may judge as a brewer, let's say you've never done wood-aged beers. You may go help judge a session just to learn there's the flavor components I'm going to look for when I do my recipe to make my wood-aged beers. That's one of the best things about that program. When you get too locked in, I think you kind of miss the point of the big benefit of the BJCP program. That is just the education about the different styles of beer.
That's a really good answer. I guess I wasn't expecting something to be so,
I drink beer and I know things.
There you go. I've heard stories of how judges won't score a beer, say, above a 39, or that there are some judges out there that believe that there's no 45 and above scoring beers out there in the wild. How much of this do you think is actually out there, and how much of it do you think actually affects the entries and the legitimacy of all that?
It's kind of hard. I think there are some judges that I won't score a beer of 50, for example. It becomes a subconscious thing. They'll sometimes get locked into looking for the little things. Remember we talked about before, for example, a beer that's almost no head retention. You're not going to lose a point. You're going to lose more like 10 to 15 points because it's going to trickle down the other categories of your judging. So I do believe there are judges like that. But kind of I just think there's no such thing as a 50 beer. I don't think there's such thing as this. There's some judges who are just hypercritical. They'll look for those points to make sure you don't hit there. I'm kind of that way, and I say in the sense of if I give a beer 40 plus points, it's really, really, really a good beer. And I'll tell you why it's a very good beer. Okay. So that being said, if I do over the years, I'm probably that guy who's more in that high 30s for good beers, but I'll make sure you know when it's extra special. There's some judges that just won't give you anything above that, and I don't know what to tell you. Unfortunately, there's judges like that. Just the same as on the other end of the spectrum we were talking about earlier. Technically, you can give a beer a 0 in the BJCP program. Now, you didn't before. I won't give a beer below a 20. Okay, though I have latitude to do so, I won't, because in my brain, I don't want to be the guy that for a first time brewer is doing his first competition and his beer's just not good. He's just learning how to brew. But if I beat it up so much, or I give it, let's say, a 5 out of 50 points, what are the odds he's going to brew that second or third batch of beer? Probably not. More in my brain, I'm thinking he's more likely to say, you know what, I can do another hobby. I can collect stamps or something. So I'd rather, let me give you some good feedback to work on things. I mean, a beer that's 20 points, obviously we should know if there's some serious issues. Could be sanitation issues, could be fermentation issues, could be all sorts of issues. But it's one of those, I'd rather tell you this, your beer's got some problems, like the beer gushes, which tends to tell me more likely than not there's an infection. I said it also could be affected by your fermentation temperatures. You could have some off flavors that have come about because of this. You need to just go back and look at your equipment, look at your sanitation methods, look at your fermentation temperatures, look at those little basics of brewing beer, and see if you don't make a better beer. I can't tell you it's a recipe thing at that point in time because I don't know what your recipe is, and no one can really tell you what your recipe is because more likely than not, the flaws in the beer aren't recipe generated as more so than maybe everything else but. Okay. When I had my wine shop way back when, it was on Homebrew supplies. What I just used to tell people, your first beer is awesome because it's your first beer, so no matter what, it's awesome. Your second beer, if you did things right, it's going to be good as well. And usually your third beer, you're cocky because you think this is real easy to do. Then you have those flaws, the sanitation issues, fermentation issues, things like that, where your third beer is horrible. And it's usually because you got cocky because you thought your first two beers were so awesome.
Or you found those shortcuts.
That's when you get that kind of like, oh, there is a little more work to this. There's a little more specificity to this, and you learn those. You learn from those, and that's a good thing. That same kind of thing in the judging sheet. I mean, you'll joke about sometimes talking about some of these beers. This is not a good beer, but you have to make sure when you're criticizing that beer. To me, it's harder to judge and make comments on a beer that's a lower 20-point beer, let's say, versus a higher beer. Because I tell you all the good stuff I like about this beer and give you 43 points, right? Or 39 because I'm that kind of guy. From the lower end, the harder part is sometimes I can't tell you what's wrong. I know that my experience is that I'm seeing things like the beer the gush. I'm seeing things that tells me they're more likely maybe an infection, and it maybe the bottle may not be clean enough. Maybe some of the beer itself. I don't know how to tell you what. I can't really pinpoint even fix this.
You have some base issues.
But it's one of those you just need to step back, take a deep breath, just refocus on it and do it again.
So are you, and this is just something that a question that I just came up with right now. So at what point, part of the bracket or whatever, are you talking more about the praises of a beer than the negatives, right? So what threshold, are you seeing more praises on a score sheet at a 40 than you are a 35?
No. They're kind of the same. I mean, it's one of those where, generally speaking, I don't write a lot of, this beer sucks. It will be one of those and usually there are issues, so there's some opportunities. So at least it's kind of positive, get a positive spin.
I've gotten back some of your score sheets. They're very positive.
Yeah. I mean, a beer that's a 35 or a 40, if I tell you that usually they're both, there's not issues I have to really get into. It's one of those man, this is good. And sometimes it may be, for example, a beer that this is really good beer maybe a month or so ago. You start to tell it's kind of on its decline. You're starting to get those little oxidizing kind of notes to it. It's like good beer. Man, it's probably an awesome beer about a month ago, but now it's starting to decline. Where that'd be like a beer that a month prior to may have been a 40. It's now 35 because it's now starting to age. I tend to always do. It's easier. To me, it's always easier. I want to encourage you to brew. I want to encourage you, and I'm not sitting here. My whole life's not to be do this or this or this. Some judges get too caught up, and for a while the BJCP was a little bit. You make sure you're being critical and stuff. You don't have to be critical. It's one of those. It's easier to say, I'm noting this, let's say, off flavor, which it could be it could be yeast-driven off flavor, could be issues with your hop schedule, it could be an issue, some issue with the recipe itself. I can't tell you specifically what it is. I don't think it's my job to try to break down, pinpoint exactly here's what your flaw is, because again, if I point out something that again, we talked about before, where I said you should have decocted when you did decoct, then what are you trusting for me as a judge? I'm trying to give you feedback, and usually my feedback is more positive. Even a beer that's 22 beer, I'm not going to sit and say your beer totally sucks. You need to go back and re-look at your stuff. I want you to walk away saying you're not happy about the score. Hopefully you're not happy about the score. But the whole point is, doesn't mean stop brewing. It just means just go revisit what you did. But it's real. It happens. I had a brewer back when I had the shop. There was this one brewer that, I had a couple different stories. Because I get the brewer that when they walk in to ask me hey, I got a beer, I have a problem with it, then they spend more time defending their beer before we tried the beer. Okay, so it's you're trying to any issue I may have. And this one brewer, this one specific story, it was a gusher. Yeah, he had an infection. And he said, it couldn't be infected because I did this and this and this. And it's like, well, besides a couple things he actually did wrong. I just looked at him and I looked at our books, and our little library books. And said, so you need to write this author, this author, this author, this author, and tell them that they're wrong in understanding beers. And he just looked at me and I said, your problem is this. Yes, one of two things. And his actually the specific problem where he had it fermenting next to like a window mounted air conditioning unit. So his temperature fluctuated like this the whole time during fermentation, which is going to cause issues. It's like, I did this. Like, well, but you ideally want to ferment at a fairly constant temperature. The fact is, your beer went through this, it's going to cause problems. So just go find a different place to ferment your beer.
95 or nothing, baby.
That's what it was. It was one of those where he spent more time just trying to preempt anything I may say. It's like, if you want me to talk about your beer, trying to preempt it it's not a discussion anymore. You just want me to praise your beer because it's bad? Okay. Hey, and I told him that. I said, your beer sucks. Yay.
Right.
So I didn't, it's one of those where like, if you want to talk about your beer, let's talk about your beer. But if you want to say I'm the great brewer and I don't know what the deal is, okay. Got another brewer real quick, sir. We had this one brewer, NASA engineer, whose beer started at original gravity of, let's say 1050 or something like that, 1040, 1050, whatever it was. Then he's telling me that something's wrong with his beer. He says, my finishing gravity is like 10 to 60. I said, well, your hydrometer's wrong.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, that's not right. I said,
how can you have more gravity
than you
started with?
And I was looking at him like, well, you don't gain gravity during fermentation. It actually drops down. That's how you know what alcohol's being produced. What you're telling me is more sugar's brewed as you fermented your beer.
You added sugar. Then.
He didn't believe me. Then he went to my stepdad, who was an engineer, not a NASA engineer. But he's telling the whole story, and he just looked and he said, did you talk to Mike about this? And he's like, well, he said this. And he goes, well, it sounds like our hydrometer's wrong. But that happens. I mean, that's actually one of the things I don't want to say I hated. It was entertainment in its own little way. We have brewers like, they want criticism, but yet they want to already preempt anything you may say about the beer. It's like, if you want an honest opinion, I can give you an honest opinion. No harm, no foul.
Sure.
And that's part of the judging. It's like, I can sit there and just pee all over your beer. It doesn't make me a better judge. Doesn't make you a better brewer. But I can tell you, then we talk about what you like and what you don't like. I like this about your beer. Okay, I love the nose in your beer. I love these things. But you know what? You have a problem here, here, and here. Fix those, and you got your 30-point beer is not going to be a 40-plus point beer. Simple as that. Versus, watch me knock your beer all over the place. And your better judges, it's generally what you see in the comments is things like that. Where it's like, I'm here to encourage your beer. I'm not here to beat up your beer.
Right. Yeah, I'm paying you to tell me all my flaws without beating my spirit.
You like a beer, you don't like a beer. You don't absolutely hate a beer, generally speaking.
I don't.
Generally speaking. Being said, but again, the same way, I can tell you what I don't like about your beer without being mean about it. I can say, you know what, I have some problems because, for example, everything flowed out of the bottle before I even tried the beer.
There are some people that just won't listen, and you got to be a little gruff with them.
There's an older gentleman. In fact, it was a father-son. It was the older guy we called him Big Little Jim, and his son was huge, architect. It was Little Big Jim. But Big Little Jim brought Homebrew in the first meetings, and it was horrid. It was just not good. But his response was, well, that's how Homebrew should taste. I'm like, no. So we start talking, come to find out the same tubing as fermentation bucket was the same one that had been used for 30 years.
Oh.
And I said, come to the shop, spend $3 on some tubing, let's get another fermentation bucket, and see what happens. Same batch, same recipe, 2 months later, with new equipment. It was great beer. It's one of those that he didn't know what he didn't know what he didn't know.
Yes.
Right? Like that Kentucky Common. Well, this is what I like about this, but it's not a Kentucky Common. But like this guy, it's like, now Homebrew should taste like a beer, not like what you think this things you poured me a couple months ago taste like.
Yeah, we're not in the backwoods, in the holler, like doing crazy stuff. Like we're not professionals, but I mean,
Well, but that's where the guideline helps the same kind of sense. You're
Sure.
formulating a recipe. It's like, okay, well, the beer should look like this, should smell like this, should taste like this. And so learning that, then moving there to learning the recipe formulation part of the process. That like, okay, well, like you said, well, I now see why there's been more corn in this beer because that's what the style expects. That's where the guidelines help you. And again, that's also where, coming back around to the full circle, where judging helps you as a brewer. As you're a brewer, learning not just the different styles as you judge the different things and look at the guidelines for the different styles of beer, but also like tasting, like here's it, like let's use Kentucky Common. Let's say the flight has 8 different Kentucky Commons. They are not going to taste exactly the same. There's going to be differences.
Yep.
So the cool part as a judge, learning again what you like and don't like about the 8 different entries. This one, like the example you mentioned, like there should be more corn in this beer. It's missing this component to it, and you make that comment. The other one, the next one may be just totally awesome. The idea is you get that feel for where the comfort zone, where the good stuff is. And again, I don't have to brew 8 batches of Kentucky Commons to figure that out. I can judge 8 beers and go, now I get the gist of what flavor components I want. Then as a brewer, you can use that knowledge to help build your recipe. And that's to me one of the biggest benefits as a brewer who also judges is that in a way you save yourself a ton of money and time because other folks have actually done these tests for you. So for you, it's like I can use as a benefit to myself and my brewing experience.
I've heard it said that the setting of a bar or a pub will help make a beer taste better or make it taste worse, depending on the atmosphere and how it's set up. Do you think that has an effect to judging beers, homebrews?
I don't think so that much, mainly because if you're laser focused on what's supposed to take place in a judging session, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a sterile environment, but that being said, it's one of those like, if you put me a few tables at, let's say, one of our local breweries, let's say Penny's can open this room, we can judge some beers. It won't affect my judging subconsciously or anything else. In fact, I'm at Penny's. It's one of those like my focus as a judge is my sheet and the beer in front of me. So it won't really matter the surroundings. I mean, ideally, I don't want to be sitting outside in gusts of wind, in 100-degree weather in Houston, Texas, judging beers. But that being said, something standard to work off is fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be, like I said, a sterile environment kind of situation. It doesn't have to be a bar. In fact, we judged one round this year at a church. They had a roommate open a room for us, whose pastor is a brewer. It's one of those, like, it doesn't matter as long as the constant's there, like the water and crackers on the table. Here's the way the beers are handled from the refrigerator here, and the process of judging beers. So that's all the same. So the backdrop shouldn't matter. Put it that way, it shouldn't matter. When it does matter, then you got to move your judging place.
Right.
We've got to do that before. It's like we're going to judge years ago. Maybe pick the spot to try to do judging, and once you really look at it again, it's like, yeah, we won't be able to have that pocket of time or whatever to get a good judging session done. So we have to find a different location just for that reason.
So this is a fan submitted one, and honestly, so I've been meaning to call out these fan submitted ones. There's been a couple of them through these questions. So if you ever have an idea that you'd like to see presented, or you got some questions, follow me on Instagram and all that. I'll normally throw out some ideas that I'm looking at. But so where do you get the writing utensils to fill out these score sheets to write the lightest possible able and still somehow be able to smear it somehow? And do all judges doctors due to their handwriting?
Again, back up and mentioned earlier, most competitions will supply tools for you, like erasers, and use your mechanical pencils. The bad part is I bear down. So you know if I'm judging using mechanical pencils, so I hear a snap, snap, snap,
Yeah.
snap. So that's why I get my own number twos. I have my own sharpener because I know that's why I write. So generally, let's just say for competition, mechanical pencils are used. Um, why some judges write as light as possible can tell you. Why some judges just scroll all over the place can tell you. Some are just bad that way. That's that good and bad with using online type judging, which for some of those folks that can't write but can type really fast, that's awesome. I'm this kind of guy. I'm a hunt pack kind of guy, so it'll take me 8 years to write a judging sheet, but I can use a pencil to do this. That's again one of those things, to be honest, where your steward and your head judge should be an assistant in the same kind of sense. When you get that judging sheet that has very little written, or written so poorly, scrawls poorly, you just can't read it. It's one of those, if nothing else, hey, you know what? I got your score, but you need to rewrite this judging sheet. A lot of places aren't that proactive, but to be honest, they should be. Because I agree, same kind of sense. As a brewer, I want feedback. I'm getting no feedback where I just see chicken scratch on a piece of paper. It doesn't tell me anything. And if I have to spend more time trying to decipher what she wrote, that's going to be a good reason for a complaint. It's like I shouldn't be getting these kind of sheets. So, but yeah, just some judges that way. Some are just horrible. But the ones who really admit it at least take the time.
I've got it back a score sheet where I've had to run it past the 2 or 3 people. And say, what is this? Like, what does this say? Like, what's your guess? You know,
Right.
like,
It's a shame. I mean, it should be that way. It's just one of those, a good number of judges, I'm going to generalize, just they'll judge a beer, they just don't want to take the time writing a bunch of stuff. And the bad part is, good judges, good effective judges, judges that communicate, the ones that get the praise heaped on things, the ones that take the time to do exactly that, is let brewers know, but you're not letting anybody know something when basically it's hieroglyphics on a piece of paper. It's one of those, it's almost want to tell the judge, if you don't want to write, then just don't judge. Be a
Right.
steward.
so that kind of, you kind of answered a little bit of the next question about, looks like there's a slow shift towards electronic score sheets, and how do you feel about that trend?
I don't think it's a bad trend. Again, me personally, I'm so slow typing. It's like, you know what? I can give him my numbers and then give you the sheet in a day or two. Kind of thing. Give me time to actually type out my notes.
Right.
It's not a bad thing if for no other reasons. The fact that as a brewer, I get my feedback, I can actually read what's written versus chicken scratch or hieroglyphics. So I like that. The only negative sometimes, I think initially doing it, we went through that with, was it around about 2 years ago, I believe, we were doing the virtual, during COVID, doing the virtual judging and stuff, where there's electronic score sheets. It's just one of those, like, as long as I had till the end of the day to turn in what I turn in, it's all good because I actually type out my notes. But it was nice that you got detailed notes. It's nice you got notes you could read. The bad thing is it actually just kind of slows the process.
That's
Okay.
another barrier.
So it's one of those, I mean, ideally, but they want you to judge a beer in like 7 to 10 minutes, each beer. That gives you a good time to really study the beer, discuss the beer, make your notes about the beer. Okay. For me, in electronic format, I can't do that. I can do all the actual tasting. It'll take me that extra 10 to 15 minutes to actually type the notes. And you don't want that to be the reason your flight took 3 hours versus 1 hour. You know, if you're judging with me, that's what's going to happen.
That makes sense.
But I like the best part about that is the fact, if nothing else, as a brewer, I'm getting feedback I can read. And since there's time, like I said, I'm judging, let's say, on a Saturday. I'm not turning about judging sheets for a week, right? Let's say and then a week or two when the awards come out, okay, releasing the judging sheets, you come get them after this date. I have time to actually do electronic format on the sheet. You know, as long as here are the numbers, and then I'll fill out the details later.
And you're a volunteer anyways. You're not getting paid to judge these things, and so there should be some give and take on making things convenient for you
Right.
as well as the brewer entrant. And to tell you the truth, I've been a proponent of the electronic score sheets just because the legibility in writing and lightness of writing aspect, you know. But I guess me being, the millennial end of things, who doesn't know how to type? in this day and age. And it makes sense though. Like if you're not experienced with it every day, then it's just a skill set that you don't necessarily.
Back in the days of the telegram. When I went to high school, I was talking about taking typing as I like it. My mom's like, you'll work somewhere and have a secretary. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Okay. I did. And so I've learned lots of shortcuts in my computer typing. But yeah, I think ultimately that's the best way to go. Just it's a matter of coordinating in terms of I just need your raw numbers for my data. But I need your official filled out sheet by this date. They can have their transcriber and save it for submission to everybody after the competition, which I think is perfectly fine. Again, you're working with, I'm volunteering. Well, Judges Beer Saturday, I just need your filled out sheet by next Saturday. So I have your numbers. Okay.
And the nice thing about it, though, is I guess it just shows that there is a little bit of flexibility, some evolution in the program.
It's a matter of, you got to find the happy medium. I mean, of course, obviously, it's that we'll have by next Saturday. What if I don't have it done by then? Well, then we'll have to kill you. I mean,
yeah.
But I think ultimately, I like the idea of electronic. For the guy who's this, I like the idea of electronic score sheet. I like the idea, if it's done correctly, that you actually have a window to take advantage of instead of me trying to scroll everything out in 7 to 10 minutes, and that's why you get the chicken scratch, because you get judged like, I can't done this real fast. But it's like, I just need your sheet by this day. Just give me your number. I can work from there. And I think it's a good way to do it. I think it's just one of those where it's just finding that happy medium to deal with the Telegram guy versus Millennium.
So, what's the best way to send in entries? Canned, bottled, bottle condition, filled from keg? I already know where this is heading.
I'm looking forward to, that you haven't really seen yet. I'm willing to bet, because canning lines and canning machines are fairly inexpensive now. I'm betting you're going to see a lot of competition say, I want canned entries.
Really?
I think so. I mean, not tomorrow, not next month. I think in a year or two, I think at least one competition will experiment with it. Say, hey, we want
from a stackability, storage, like compartment. Yeah.
Well, just generally it's easier to handle, and you control it better. Obviously, depending on the style of beer.
That's exactly where.
some off a bottle, something out of the keg, over bottle condition. Years ago, again, the same kind of thing, because you didn't have the access to a lot of this equipment, or just in terms of supply, like for kegs, you didn't have a lot of counterpressure filled bottles, and so you had a lot of bottle conditioned beers, and so you're used to it. Nowadays, it's more like you watch judges will ding beers because of bottle condition, which isn't necessarily a flaw. It's just that's the way I do a beer.
Exactly.
So, and it's a hard. It's one of those where I think ultimately you're seeing more now. Things come from a keg, which is fine. I think, I mean, bottle condition, bottled beers, obviously, but I think ultimately, my educated guess, ultimately, I think you'll start to see some competitions that want canned entries, because they're so easy in terms of transportation, things like this. I can tell you, I want 12-ounce bottles, brown, not green, should be your standard long neck bottle, and you're going to get a third of the entries. They're going to be like, here's stubbies, here's this.
Caps.
Here's
all
why.
Specialized.
So yeah, here's my thick bottle. Here's my thick glass Belgians for my Belgian style beers, which not technically it's like if I did that 12-ounce brown thing, I'm good to go. But the bad part is, as far as storage and stuff, it becomes a kind of a nightmare. It's like, here's my pretty case of all these 12-ounce bottle, long neck bottles, and now here's my odd case that's wonky because I have different sized bottles and stuff. And again, you get the occasional someone's going to enter a bomber instead because they just said, well, I bottle conditions, it's in a bomber.
Yeah.
Okay, then just don't enter.
Yeah.
So, but I'm actually kind of excited and look forward to seeing if you see places that look at doing canned entries, because it's fairly inexpensive. And I've seen more homebrewers starting to turn to just here's some canned beers, no fuss, no miles.
Yeah.
Just for sharing with friends. If I've had friends said, there's some companies that are going to say, easy peasy, let's do that.
I think you're right now that you say it, and we'll probably see that before we'll see electronic score sheets. So you kind of started to answer a little bit of the next question. What is the best way to submit a bottle conditioned beer and when is it not appropriate. Now, I normally will note on my entry whenever I sign up and I say, hey, this is what I'm turning in, that on the special notes part of, hey, this is a bottle conditioned beer. So that way, hopefully, it takes into consideration when a judge pours it, they're just not going to, like flip it over or
Gotcha.
anything like that.
Well, there's no, to me, not much of a difference. Kind of is, depending on, again, the time of the year, whatever. Whether I'm submitting a bottle entry from a keg or from bottle conditioned beer. I do think it's a very smart thing, and that's a good thing you do, is make comments. Because usually a beer entry, do you have any comments about your beer? A lot of brewers don't say it's bottle conditioned. That makes sense. If I'm judging a beer and they say this beer is bottle conditioned beer, I'll play that game with a flashlight and say, oh, it looks like it's bottle conditioned. Just tell me. Okay, as a judge, I'm good with that. It doesn't change my judging. Some folks, it may affect some judges. I think some brewers will tell you that because they don't want to judge, again, to ding your beer because it's bottle conditioned. To me, I think it's actually the smart thing to do, because I'd rather know more about your beer than what I'm judging versus we had a beer, I remember the category, John Black judged it. And someone said this beer had some leaves in it. Then we became a running joke that night where judge saying, which leaves? How old were the leaves? And he actually wrote that detail on, it was the same beer in a different category, but actually mentioned them, identified what leaf it was. But it's one of those, like, I want information. I don't like sell information. That's one of those where we kind of figured out during the boil some leaves fell into the pot. So to cover his butt, the guy's like, oh, there's some leaves in this. Okay. But same kind of thing there, this round, circle around. Now you have a bottle conditioned beer. If I know it's bottle conditioned, I don't have to be surprised. I don't have to write. If I'm told it's bottle conditioned beer from the outset versus picking it out or a little flashlight or see things around and see it's bottle conditioned, because again, some judges, they'll automatically say, well, you should have told me this. Tell them. It's easier to judge a beer when I know what I'm tasting.
Exactly. And that's part of the thing was, like, if you're pouring it and you see some haze or whatever, maybe you'll say, oh, this was bottle conditioned. Maybe I disturbed the yeast cake at the bottom of the bottle.
Well, it's also like the occasional bottle that has a chill haze. That's why usually the bottles, because the bottles come in, they're fairly cool.
Right.
Okay, let's say mid to high 30s max. So it's one of those, like for certain styles of beer, let's give a little time to warm up. And beer that looks like it may have some chill haze, same kind of thing. Let it sit for a couple minutes, because the chill haze will drop out. It'll clear. Just give it time to clear. So that way you're not digging the beer for it. But yeah.
How much say do you have in what you judge, and are there any styles that you refuse to judge? I think we've pretty much hammered that one out for the most part.
Light lager.
Light lager. I don't think...
I don't mind judging. I know I'm not a good judge. It's one of those, I know that's a category of beers that I'm not a good judge of. Not a fair judge, I guess best way to put it. But I may be biased by my senses. I don't want to punish a brewer because of my senses. So that's why. It's not that I can judge any beer. Because obviously, I could lie about any beer too. But the point being is, like, if I could judge anything else but that, I'm good to go. Pick one for me to judge. I can judge if I have to, but I can't guarantee that I don't think I can give the good feedback that I want to give that brewer.
Right, something that's fair.
Right. Well, something he learned something from. Well, it smells vegetable. Well, it doesn't smell vegetable to me. Yeah, you probably don't, because I'm hypersensitive. So
Right.
You're right.
So we're coming in towards the end here. I won't keep you very much longer, or at least not on film. We'll grab another pint here in a little bit. Is there anything that you would like to see change in judging? If so, how did we get there?
I think it's not bad now. I think that, and it's going to sound weird, I did like initially when BJCP kept expanding categories and subcategories, because it just makes it too much fun to keep up on. But the fact that I can have a style guideline next to me or I have it on my phone, I can deal with that, because I've judged enough beer. It's like, just tell me what I'm tasting. Tell me what I'm looking for, and I can work from there. I like, again, a few years ago, through the national competition stuff, and some competitions follow it, some don't, the Q system of judging beers, where it's like, okay, we're judging 12 beers, here's 2 tables, and I'm not telling you you're judging 1 through 6, you're judging 7 through 12, you're judging the beers that comes to you to all 12 are judged. So you're not locked in. It helps actually keep everything movable. It tends to make things a little bit faster.
Yeah.
So I like that. What I don't like about it is you don't have as much of the steward interaction. Stewards, like I said, generally speaking, the tables you have a steward, even if it's steward between two tables, or like being that liaison and taking care of stuff and helping the head judge do their job. A lot of competitions, they're I don't want to say an afterthought, but kind of like they don't rely, they're not taking advantage of what a steward can do to help everybody out in the competition. Outside of that, I don't know. I think some of it's just enforcing the rules we have. I mean, every competition, generally speaking, you're trying to have at your judging table at least one certified or above judge. Some competitions, like
And that's the lowest.
right. In some
Right.
competitions, they can't get one. They're like, not the lowest rank. Hey,
Well,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about that.
I know what you're saying. But the point being is like, well, I don't have enough certified judges, so we'll just put two novice judges together. Well, it doesn't change that fact. I mean, I think you have to think about judging in terms of how to benefit the brewer, not to benefit the judge. If that makes sense. I'm not making the table to make your life easier. I mean, if I had my table with my little hand-picked judge to judge with all the time, I'd be good to go. But sometimes, hey, that person or those persons aren't there. That's why I personally like judging with new judges. Because you know what? There's always going to be a new judge. There's going to be someone there who wants to learn how to judge but doesn't know what to do. Come on down. I'd like to see, be nice if we had a lot of judges who thought more that way instead of, where's my buddy? Let's hook up and sit at a table and judge beers. Not that things can't get done. And again, I appreciate that as well. But the same kind of sense, I have no problem. Like, I mean, let's sit together at a table and judge if we've got certified judges, if we've met the minimums of what we need to judge the beers. There's just not a lot. It's one of those, it's I'm not sure there's a definitive this, that, or the other. It's more of just like, and the hard part is trying to encourage folks. People who are new in a brew club, you can tell them 85 times, come out and judge, come out and steward, you'll learn something, and they still get reluctant. It's one of those you got to make them feel comfortable. I think you have to find some way through the clubs, whatever, to let folks know it is being a steward is not a bad thing. Being a steward is a good thing, and you learn stuff. That the whole process of judging is about learning. Okay, that's the whole, as I said, that's the whole point of the BJCP. It's about learning. And it's okay. And it doesn't cost you anything, and you get free beer. I can't see any negative there.
Right.
So I don't see a lot of changes outside of things like canned beers and electronic judging.
Let's see here. This is another fan submitted one. Why are the BJCP and the Brewers Association guidelines different? Are you familiar with the other program?
I am to an extent. Brewer Association is more professional brewing and commercial breweries.
Okay.
They're different. I mean,
Because they're different organizations.
well, one, they're different organizations, but more importantly, it's the guidelines are different. I mean, if you read like Brewer Association guideline for, let's say a stout, let's say a foreign stout, will not be the same as BJCP. BJCP is a little more liberal. Brewer Association guidelines are more strict. Okay, that's why also like world beer comes up. That's why there's so many categories and subcategories. They're very specific, and they're trying to it's one of those where I'm trying to guarantee a standardized, trying to make it more standardized in terms of beer styles for the commercial brewery versus, hey, we're just trying to make a good stout. So generally speaking, that's kind of the difference between the two. They're both kind of looking for the same kind of thing as far as what they want in a beer. It's just one of those, or one's are more rigid, and again, you're applying a hobby versus a commercial brewery. That's why there's going to be a difference in there.
But having said that, a professional brewery doesn't have to adhere to either one of them.
Do what you want.
Exactly. Do whatever's going to make you money. Let's see here. Are there any other brewing programs that you know of? Are there any other judging programs that you know of that will give you the ability to judge brews at other competitions? Is there anything besides BJCP that's going to let you help judge beers?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, all sorts of competitions are just open invites. Like, for example, state fairmen say, hey, come up, judge beers. They're not here to look for your BJCP judge, whatever. They just want people to drink some beer and try some beer and make comments about a beer.
Sure.
So there's no real formal, I mean, what your MHP you talked about. It's kind of like encouraging that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other regional similar type programs. Well, you did have, in a sense, with MCAP,
Yeah.
same kind of system. It's like, here's a parallel system as far as competitions and BJCP and things like that. But there's not like, I want judges who are non-BJCP judges. You know, there's no,
It looks
as
like
far as I know of.
Looks
You know,
like BJCP is pretty much the standard
I mean,
that everybody's accepted.
Well, it's good
Not-
guideline,
not-
yeah.
Not to say that there's not other ones out there
Right.
or in transition of coming out or whatever.
Or again, a little region, we do this, we do this, we do this, which is fine. There's no harm or foul. The whole, again, the ultimate guide is we're trying to learn about beer. We're trying to learn how to, you know, what we like about beers and not like about beers. It's all good no matter who's doing what.
Sure.
But yeah.
And then pretty much the last one, Joel writes, "Why is United terrible all the time?" And I'm gonna take it that he's talking about soccer,
He is.
the other football.
Joel, this is why you'll never be recommended by me as Brewer of the Year in any way, shape, or form in the Bay Area Mastronauts, because you suck that way. When Man U wins everything this year, I will come to your house and beat you up. Have a nice day.
So
United, baby.
to wrap it all up, thank you so much for coming out here. I had a good time. I think we had a lot of information here. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. I will try to get Mr. Wiley to come back and answer those, or let him view them anyways and give me the answers, and I'll type them out for him.
Yahoo. Thank you very much. This was a great time. Thank you, guys.
But check out the links in the description. Like I said, we'll have the Spotify stuff. We'll have all the links to MHP, Lonestar Circuit, Bay Area Mastronauts, Jaggers Brewing Co. Just everything that I'm involved in and love with a passion. And thank you guys so much for checking us out, hanging out. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow, all that stuff. Appreciate it. Cheers with an empty glass. That's probably some kind of cardinal sin.
Cheers.
Cheers. Well, I'm not terribly great at it, but I figured if somebody else isn't doing what I'm doing, I'm not going to do it. Because I kind of like the idea of the fermentors. I don't know if I've ever explained it to you, but for fermentors, like we're planting ideas and letting them grow into something else. So